Lower your sword, set it down gently, the fire is already burning, and there is nowhere you need to be tonight. Tonight we are going back, all the way back, to a time before the mountains of Skyrim existed, before the first dragon priest carved a word into stone, before even the stars were stars. We are going to walk through 170 of the strangest, most layered, most quietly astonishing lore facts buried inside the Elder Scrolls, and we are going to take our time with every single one of them. Get comfortable. This is a long road, and that is exactly the point. Part 1. Before the world was a world. Creation, chaos, and the gods who ran before you can understand anything about Skyrim, about the Nords, about dragons or Daedra or the Thu'um. You have to understand the very strange idea at the center of it all. The world you are wandering through, every frost-covered pass, every amber torch burning inside a Dwemer ruin, every sound the wind makes when it rolls across the tundra, all of it exists because of a mistake. Or, depending on who you ask, a trick, or maybe a gift. Nobody in Tamriel entirely agrees, and that uncertainty is built into the bones of everything. Fact 1. The universe began with two forces that were not gods. They were just states of being. The Elder Scrolls creation myth does not begin with a divine mind sitting alone in the darkness, deciding to build something. It begins instead with two opposing concepts that simply existed in relation to each other. Anu, the force of stasis, of light, of sameness. And Padome, also called Sithis in many traditions, the force of change, of darkness, of differentiation. These were not beings with plans or personalities in any way we would recognize. They were more like fundamental properties of existence, the way heat and cold are not personalities, but simply conditions. Their interaction, the endless friction and interplay between those two states, created everything else. The universe itself is that friction made permanent. From the dance of Anu and Padme came beings called the Et Ada, which translates roughly as original spirits. These were something between forces and persons, vast, shapeless potentials that gradually took on names, spheres of influence, and something resembling identity. From these, Eteda would eventually come both the Aedra and the Daedra, the two great categories of divine and semi-divine being that shape the world of the Elder Scrolls. But at the beginning, they were all just the Et Ada, spinning in the space between Anu's stillness and Padome's motion. Fact 2. The world only exists because a god tricked other gods into giving up their immortality to build it. One of the Et Ada was Lorkhan, and Lorkhan had an idea. He wanted to create a mortal realm, a physical world where conscious experience could happen in a fixed, persistent way rather than in the formless, abstract manner of divine existence. To do this, he needed other spirits to contribute pieces of themselves. And here is where things become genuinely murky and genuinely fascinating, because the accounts disagree about whether what Lorkhan did was heroic, tragic, or simply deceptive. Some traditions say he convinced the Et Ada freely. Others say he hid the truth from them. The truth he may have hidden was this: creating a mortal world requires the contributing spirits to sacrifice enormous amounts of their power, perhaps all of it. The act of giving divine essence to the structure of a physical reality drains it from the beings who provide it. Some Et Ada who helped build Mundus, as the mortal world came to be called, survived the process significantly diminished. Others essentially gave so much of themselves that they became part of the world's foundation, what are called the earth bones, the laws of nature embedded in living reality. And those are the Aedra, the ones who gave, the ones who refused, who said no to Lorkhan's proposal and kept all their divine power for themselves. Those are the Daedra. And because they never participated in Mundus's construction, they were never bound by its rules. They remained full, complete, sovereign, able to influence the mortal world whenever they chose while never truly being subject to it. This is why you can negotiate with a Daedric prince from a position of relative coherence, while an Aedra, one of the divines, is almost impossible to actually encounter. The Aedra are too woven into the world's fabric to step outside it. Fact 3. The stars are not stars. They are holes. This is one of the most quietly staggering ideas in all of Elder Scrolls cosmology, and most players never stop to think about it. When Lorkhan's project was complete, or perhaps when it became apparent what the cost truly was, a being named Magnus, who is understood as the architect of magic in the world, decided he wanted no more of it. He became disgusted, or perhaps simply exhausted, by what Mundus was turning out to be, and so he tore himself free of the mortal plane and fled to a place called Aetherius, the immortal realm where pure magical energy exists. His departure ripped a hole in the sky of Mundus. That hole became the sun. Other spirits followed him, smaller and less powerful. Each of their departures tore a smaller opening. Those openings became the stars. Every point of light you see in the night sky of Tamriel is the remnant of a divine being escaping from the world they helped create, or were tricked into creating, or gave themselves to create. The light bleeding through the holes is magical energy, raw Aetherius leaking into the mortal world. This is why Magica exists in Nirn at all. It flows in through those wounds. The night sky, as beautiful and cold and vast as it appears from a hilltop in Whiterun Hold, is essentially a scarred surface, a record of abandonment. Fact 4. Lorcan's heart was torn from his body and thrown to the earth as punishment. After Mundus was made, many of the Aedra were furious about what had happened to them, diminished, trapped, their divine fullness gone. Akatosh, the dragon god of time, led what amounted to a divine reckoning. Lorcan, depending on which cultural tradition is telling the story, was killed, or something far stranger happened to him. What most accounts agree on is this: his heart was cut from his chest and hurled down to the mortal world. It landed inside Red Mountain, on the island of Vardenfell, in what would eventually become the province of Morrowind. This heart, the heart of Lorcan, is no ordinary artifact. It is a fragment of divine essence, older than most gods, holding power so concentrated that simply touching it improperly destroys things. Thousands of years later, the Dwemer would find it, and what they tried to do with it would erase their entire civilization from history. But that comes later. For now, just hold that image. Deep inside a smoking mountain, in a chamber that no ordinary mortal was ever meant to find, something divine and wounded sat in the dark, waiting. Fact 5. The Aedra became the planets. After the creation of Mundus was complete, the surviving Aedra, those who gave of themselves but still retained enough existence to remain distinct, took positions in the cosmos around the mortal world. In Nordic cosmology, in imperial cosmology, in many of Tamriel's traditions, the Aedra are understood to literally be the planets visible in the sky. Akatosh is the sun's guardian and the largest presence in the heavens. The other 8 divines are associated with the 8 planets visible from Nirn. They are not metaphors. They are what those lights in the sky actually are. Fact 6. The Daedric princes each rule their own universe. The Daedra who refused to participate in Mundus's creation did not simply float formless in the void. With their full, undiminished power intact, they built their own planes of existence. Private realities shaped entirely by their personalities and desires. These are the realms of oblivion. There are 16 major Daedric princes, and therefore 16 major oblivion planes. Hermaeus Mora's Apocrypha is an infinite library above an ocean of black fluid, where forbidden knowledge is stored in books with no titles, guarded by creatures made of the same hunger for information that Mora himself embodies. Molag Bal's Cold Harbor is described as a dying mirror of Nirn, a gray, freezing hellscape version of the mortal world, stripped of color and warmth. Sheogorath's Shivering Isles are split down the middle between mania and dementia, 2 expressions of madness that cannot coexist and never stop trying to. Namira rules the scuttling void. Hircine's hunting grounds are an eternal wilderness where the thrill of the hunt never ends. Mehrunes Dagon's Deadlands are pure volcanic destruction, fire and ruin as far as existence extends. Each of these realms is not just a location. It is a thought made real. It is what a Daedric prince fundamentally is, expressed as geography. Fact 7. Meridia was once something other than a Daedric prince. Here is where the categories start to blur in interesting ways. Meridia, the prince of life and light, the one who despises undeath with every facet of her being. She was not originally a Daedric prince at all. She was one of the Magna Gae, the lesser spirits who fled Mundus alongside Magnus, tearing their own smaller exits through the sky to reach Aetherius. But unlike the others, Meridia became fascinated with mortal existence. She refused to simply leave and stay gone. She came back, or remained involved, in a way that the other escaping spirits did not. For this, she was cast out, no longer truly Aedra, since she gave very little of herself to creation, but no longer one of the fleeing Magna Gay either. She became something else, something in between. Her nature makes her the only Daedric prince who seems to have an orientation that most mortals would recognize as genuinely good. She hates undeath because she once helped give life to the world. The violation that vampires and Draugr represent strikes something that still remembers what it was like to believe in life's sanctity. Even so, she is still a Daedric prince. When you take up the Dawnbreaker she sends you to find, you are becoming an instrument of something vast and inhuman. Her agenda, her crusade against undeath, uses mortal hands to do work she cannot or will not do herself. Her gifts come with expectation. Her idea of protecting life can involve burning quite a lot of it. She is the most benevolent of the Daedric princes, and she is still not someone to trust lightly. Fact 8. There is a Daedric prince who represents logic, and was punished for it. Jyggalag is the Prince of Order. His sphere was perfect logical deduction. He once maintained a library, called the Crystal Tower, that contained a logical prediction of every single thing that would ever happen. Not only in Mundus, but in Oblivion itself. Every action, every choice, every consequence, mapped out in advance to absolute certainty. The other Daedric princes found this terrifying. Order that complete negates free will. An Oblivion where Jyggalag's pour ran unchecked would eventually become a place where all possibility was foreclosed, where the future was already fully written. And so, collectively, they cursed him. They transformed Jyggalag into Sheogorath, his exact opposite. The Prince of Order was forced to become the Prince of Madness, experiencing his own curse as a kind of endless falling away from the clarity he once possessed. Once per era, during an event called the Grey March, Jyggalag is permitted to return to his true form and attempt to reclaim his realm. And then the cycle forces him back into Sheogorath again. It is one of the stranger tragedies in a mythology full of them. The most organized mind that ever existed, punished eternally by being made incapable of organizing anything. Fact 9. Talos ascended to godhood, and the mechanics of how he did it are still debated. Tiber Septim, the man who would become Talos, died in 3E38, after unifying all of Tamriel under a single empire. After his death, he was canonized as the 9th divine. This alone is extraordinary, a mortal human becoming a god in the same pantheon as entities who existed before the mortal world was built. But how? The traditional imperial view is simply that his deeds earned him divinity. Others argue something more technical happened, something called mantling, a process where a mortal so thoroughly imitates the role and nature of a divine being that reality itself stops being able to tell the difference. There is also a theory from a text called the Arcturian Heresy that Tiber Septim's soul is actually a composite, a fusion of 3 individuals, Hjalti, Earlybeard, Zurin Arctus, and Wolfhearth, who merged in some way that allowed a complete enough divine identity to crystallize. What is certain is that Tiber Septim was dragonborn. He studied under the Greybeards, he possessed the Thu'um, and he used the Numidium, the brass god that the Dwemer had spent generations building, now restored and weaponized, to complete his conquest of Tamriel. The power he wielded in doing so may have been the mechanism of his ascension. He didn't just conquer the world, he bent reality to his will so completely that a piece of reality decided he was divine. Fact 10. The sun damages vampires not for biological reasons, but theological ones. In the world of the Elder Scrolls, the sun is the hole that Magnus tore when he fled Mundus. But it is also more than that. In the Altmeri tradition, it is associated with Auriel, their version of Akatosh. The god Auriel, also called Ariel in some texts, is said to have sanctified the sun against undead, to have imbued that particular hole in reality with a blessing that functions as a spiritual barrier against things that have cheated death. This is why vampires suffer in sunlight, specifically. It is not simply that bright light hurts their altered physical forms. The light that comes through that particular portal carries a divine blessing embedded into its very nature, and that blessing is antithetical to vampirism and undeath. If you placed a vampire under an equally bright but purely mundane light source, the same damage might not occur. The sun is magical in a very specific way, aimed at very specific things. The Dawnguard's Auriel's bow can fire 2 kinds of enchanted arrows to interact with this directly. Blood-cursed arrows darken the sun by blocking the portal, creating a form of shade that gives vampires relief. Sun-hallowed arrows enhance the sun's light, flooding it with intensified blessing and dealing devastating damage to any undead caught outside. You are not just shooting arrows. You are adjusting the aperture of a wound in the sky that a god made when he ran away. Drop a comment and tell me where in the world you are right now and what time it is there. I love knowing where these facts are drifting out into, whether it's 2 in the morning in a cold bedroom or a quiet afternoon somewhere summer is still holding on. If this is helping you settle down for the night, hit subscribe. There are more of these waiting for you. Part 2. The Age of Dragons, Fire, Dominion, and the First Rebellion, 11. Dragons were not created. They were born from time itself. Akatosh, the dragon god of time, is the chief of the Idra, the first god to commit to the creation of Mundus. The one whose sacrifice structured the flow of time so that linear experience was even possible. And because dragons are fundamentally extensions of Akatosh's nature, they are in some sense older than almost everything else in Mundus. They did not evolve. They were not crafted. They are expressions of time and will give in physical form, which is why killing one only destroys their body. A dragon's soul does not die unless it is consumed by something capable of holding it, something like a dragonborn. Fact 12. Alduin is not Akatosh, despite what many Nords believed. This confusion is ancient and understandable. Alduin is the most powerful dragon in existence. He is called the firstborn of Akatosh. He is intimately connected to the architecture of time, tasked with consuming the world at the end of each age, each kalpa, so that a new one can begin. He is so vast, so central to the structure of the universe, that worshipping him as the dragon god of time was a natural mistake. But the dragon cult texts and Paarthurnax himself make the distinction clear. Alduin is a creation of Akatosh, an aspect, a firstborn, a chosen instrument, but not Akatosh himself. The function Alduin serves, the world eating that defines his cosmic role, is assigned to him by Akatosh's design. When Alduin abandoned that function to instead rule over mortals as a god-king, demanding worship rather than simply existing as a force of cosmic necessity, he betrayed the thing he was made to be. He was not acting as Akatosh's extension anymore. He was acting as himself, pursuing power, and that is exactly why he could be opposed. His failure was ambition. His greatness made him believe he deserved more than his function, and that belief made him vulnerable. Fact 13. Alduin's name in the dragon language means Destroyer, Devour, Master. The 3 words that compose his name in Dovazul, the dragon tongue, are Alduin, Al, the Destroyer, Du, to devour, In, the Master. This is not a title given to him by others. Dragon names are not titles. They are descriptions of essence, drawn from the dragon language's fundamental ability to make words and reality interchangeable. The name Alduin is not what he is called. It is what he is. And what he is, in the most direct possible translation, is the one who masters consumption, the destroyer who devours with absolute authority. Fact 14. The dragon language is not a language. It is a code for reality. Dovazul, the tongue of dragons, does not work the way human languages work. When you say the word for fire in a human language, you create a symbolic representation in another person's mind. The word and the fire are 2 different things. When a dragon speaks the word for fire, the word and the fire are the same thing. The utterance does not describe the concept. It instantiates it. The fire does not follow the word. The word is the fire. This is why the Thum, the shouts that the player character can learn, are so dangerous and so profound. When a human learns a word of power, they are not learning a magical trigger that activates a spell. They are learning to speak in the fundamental code of existence. Every shout is an argument with reality, and reality listens. The Greybeards understand this with absolute clarity, which is why they maintain near total silence. They have learned enough of the dragon language that even casual speech could reshape the world around them in unintended ways. Their quiet is not peace. It is discipline. It is the constant, exhausting work of choosing not to speak. Fact 15. A dragon's name, spoken aloud by someone who knows it, can compel them. Paarthurnax explains this directly. In Dovazul, a name is not simply how you identify someone. It is a complete description of their nature in the language that governs existence. To know a dragon's true name, all 3 words of it, and to speak it with the force of the Thu'um is to call something about them forward, not necessarily to control them absolutely, but to invoke them, to make their name ring in the world in a way they cannot entirely ignore. This is how the Dragonborn is able to compel Odaviing in the main quest. When you shout his name from the top of Dragon's Reach, you are not calling a dragon the way you might call a dog. You are shouting the truth of what he is. Ode, the whirlwind. Ah, the hunter. Veeing, the wing. You are making him aware of himself in a way that pulls him toward you, whether he intends to come or not. His draconic pride does the rest. He comes because it would be humiliating not to respond to such a direct invocation. But the name made him listen. Fact 16. The Dragon War began because dragons believed they were gods by birthright. In the Merethic era, the long, barely recorded age before recorded history, dragons ruled Tamriel, not as conquerors who had fought their way to dominance, as divine rulers who understood themselves to be inherently superior and therefore inherently entitled. The dragon cult arose as the human institution that organized worship of these creatures, and in its original form, on the frozen continent of Atmora, before humans migrated south, it was not tyrannical. Dragon priests in that era served as genuine intermediaries. They translated draconic wisdom, moderated disputes, and maintained a relationship that, while deeply unequal, offered humans things they valued: magical knowledge, protection, a structured world. The corruption came with migration. When the dragon cult arrived in Tamriel proper, something shifted. The balance of the arrangement deteriorated. Dragon priests began demanding increasingly brutal tribute, sacrifices, absolute submission. The theological claim that dragons were not simply powerful, but cosmically superior, that human lives had meaning only insofar as they served draconic glory, became the operational doctrine of the cult. And this is the claim that Paarthurnax would eventually decide was false. Fact 17. Paarthurnax's name in dragon language means ambition, overlord, cruelty. Par, ambition. Thur, overlord. Nax, cruelty. This is his name as he was formed, not as he became after thousands of years of meditation. His name describes what he was at his origin, in the fullness of what it meant to be a great dragon in the age of draconic supremacy. He was the most ambitious, most domineering, most ruthless lieutenant that Alduin had. The crimes he committed during the Dragon War, by his own admission, were real. When Delphine and Esbern demand his death, they are not wrong that he has blood on his hands. They are simply unable to account for what comes after blood, the possibility that the thing which committed the crimes might genuinely have changed over centuries of choosing differently. Fact 18. It may have been Kine herself who sent Paarthurnax to help humanity. Paarthurnax himself, in conversation, attributes his defection to his own realization that Alduin's claims of godhood were philosophically false. But Nordic legend tells a different version. In that tradition, Kine, the Nordic aspect of the wind goddess Kinnereth, personally intervened. She sent Paarthurnax to humanity. She is responsible for the gift. This theological reading matters because it means the Dragon War's turning point was not just a crisis of draconic conscience. It was divine intervention on behalf of mortals, with Kine using a dragon as her instrument, because mortals alone could not learn what they needed fast enough. Whether Paarthurnax was sent or chose to come, the effect was the same. He taught humans the Thu'um. He gave them the same weapon that had been used to oppress them, and that changed everything. Fact 19. 3 human heroes finally defeated Alduin, but they couldn't kill him. At the end of the Dragon War, Alduin was not dead. He had not been destroyed or driven back to wherever dragons go when their body is defeated and their soul is not consumed. The heroes, Feldir the Old, Hakon One-Eye, and Gurmlith Golden Hilt, confronted him at the throat of the world, the highest point in all of Tamriel, and used a combination of weapons. One was the Dragonren Shout, a Thu'um specifically crafted to force Alduin to experience mortality, to make an immortal being feel what it means to be finite, which was so alien and disorienting that it paralyzed him. The other was an Elder Scroll. The Elder Scroll did not kill Alduin, it displaced him. The 3 heroes cast him forward through time, throwing him into the future, removing him from their moment in history. This created what Paarthurnax calls a time wound at the summit of the throat of the world, a scar in the flow of time where past and future intersect abnormally. That wound is still there in the Fourth Era, when the Dragonborn arrives. The Elder Scroll used in the banishment is still there too, sitting at the top of the mountain, waiting thousands of years in the same spot for the moment when someone will use it to look back at what happened. And that act of looking, of the Dragonborn using the scroll to witness the original banishment, teaches them the Dragonren shout, as if time folded in on itself to complete the lesson. Fact 20. After the Dragon War, loyal dragon cult followers maintained the burial mounds for thousands of years. When the surviving dragons were hunted down after the Dragon War, they were not simply left where they fell. Members of the dragon cult, still faithful, still believing that Alduin would eventually return to resurrect his children, preserved the bodies carefully in circular burial mounds built across Skyrim. These were not passive graves. They were maintained sites of worship. People tended them for thousands of years, through the collapse of the dragon cult's political power, through the rise and fall of Nordic empires, through the beginning of recorded history. The Draugr that guard these mounds are reanimated dragon cult members. Their undead presence is not a punishment or a random curse. It is the fulfillment of a role they took on willingly, or were bound to in death. They are still keeping watch. They are still waiting for the return they were promised. And when you open one of those burial mounds and hear the resonating crack of the word wall activating, and then see that circular mound begin to heave, and a skeleton rise out of the earth, that is Alduin, somewhere else in Skyrim, doing exactly what the faithful always said he would do. Fact 21. Dragon priests once governed Skyrim through a feudal hierarchy. The 8 highest-ranking dragon priests were not all devoted to Alduin as a collective. Each was individually bound to a specific dragon, in what amounted to a feudal structure. A dragon held territory. A dragon priest administered that territory on the dragon's behalf. The masks that dragon priests wore, those ancient priceless artifacts the player can find in tombs across Skyrim, were not uniform equipment. They were personalized gifts, each enchanted by the specific dragon patron, according to that dragon's particular nature and domain. This is why Otar's mask enhances resistance to elemental magic, while Nakrian's enhances destruction and stamina. Each mask is a signature of a specific relationship between a priest and their dragon. The priest convened at Labyrinthian, then called Bromjunar, to settle territorial disputes between competing draconic claims. Their council was functional governance. When you fight a dragon priest in a ruin, you are not fighting a random monster. You are fighting an ancient administrator, still performing the last function they were assigned. Fact 22. Bromjunar was the capital city of the entire dragon cult. Labyrinthian, the ruins in Hjalmarch hold that you explore during the College of Winterhold quest line, was once called Bromjunar. It served as the administrative capital of the dragon cult's theocratic empire, possibly the political center of all ancient Skyrim. The 8 major dragon priests gathered there. Their council managed the entire empire's governance. Deep within the complex, a shrine with busts of all 8 priests still stands, suggesting this was their primary ceremonial site. When you fight through Labyrinthian's puzzle-filled corridors and eventually confront the Staff of Magnus at its center, you are moving through what was once the seat of an empire. The maze-like complexity that gives it its modern name was originally a functioning seat of power. The grandeur of what remains is only a fragment of what it once was. Fact 23. The last surviving dragon priests chose mass suicide rather than surrender. In 1E139, a Nordic king named Skorm Snowstrider discovered a secluded fortress in the Gerald Mountains called Forel Host. Inside, he found the last significant concentration of dragon cult loyalists in Skyrim, diehards who had refused to abandon their faith after the cult's defeat. When Skorm's forces breached the fortress, they found everyone inside already dead. The dragon priest Ragat had led the survivors in a ritual of mass poisoning. They drank together and died together, rather than surrender or be captured. This was not cowardice. It was the final act of people who meant what they believed. To be captured was to face either execution or apostasy, forced denial of the religion that had been the entire framework of their lives. Ragat and his people chose death over either outcome. And in the strange logic of Skyrim's undead mechanics, Ragat is still there when you find Forelhost in the game, still watching, still refusing to let the last stronghold fall. Fact 24. Paarthurnax has spent 4,000 years fighting his own nature. After the Dragon War, after teaching humans the Thu'um, after Alduin's banishment, Paarthurnax did not go on living freely. He retreated to the throat of the world and has remained there in isolation ever since, not as a punishment, but as a conscious, chosen quarantine. He knows what he is. He knows that dragons are fundamentally oriented toward dominance and conquest. Every day he sits on that frozen peak is a day he is choosing not to do what every draconic instinct says he should. When you speak with him, and he talks about the difficulty of this, about the dark shadow of what he is, the constant work of restraint, it is not false modesty. The meditation he practices, the thu'um applied to contemplation rather than combat, is not a hobby. It is a survival strategy. He keeps himself at the highest point in the world, away from people and kingdoms, and the thousand small provocations that might give his ancient nature an opening. The graybeards visit him and learn from him, but he remains alone. His thousands of years of restraint are not a passive achievement, they are an active one, chosen anew every single day. Part 3. The Dwemer. Engineers who tried to become gods. Fact 25. The Dwemer did not believe in gods. They believed in science strong enough to make gods irrelevant. The Deep Elves, the Dwemer, were unlike any other civilization in Tamrielic history, not because of their engineering skill, though that was genuinely unmatched, but because of their philosophy. Every other culture in Tamriel organized itself around some relationship with divine powers, whether worship, negotiation, or fearful appeasement. The Dwemer organized themselves around the idea that divinity was a technical problem, that the gap between mortal and divine was simply a gap in knowledges and engineering, not a metaphysical barrier. They did not worship the Idra or the Daedra, they studied them, the way an entomologist studies insects. Fact 26. Dwemer technology ran on sound, specifically on the manipulation of reality through resonance. What we call Dwemer technology, and what looks from the outside like extraordinarily advanced mechanical engineering, was actually something far stranger. Tonal architecture, the term for their signature approach, was the practice of manipulating reality through sound. The Dwemer understood that existence itself was, in some fundamental sense, composed of vibrations. Different tones, different resonances could interact with the structure of reality at a physical and even metaphysical level. Their massive pipe organs in underground ruins were not decorative. Their resonating chambers were not just acoustically interesting. The machines that still run in Dwemer ruins without any visible power source, the animunculi that patrol, the steam that drives the pistons, are all running on tonal power. Self-sustaining resonances built it into the structure of the devices themselves, tones that maintain the function indefinitely because they interact directly with the fabric of existence, rather than with any external fuel supply. This is also why the Thu'um and Dwemer technology feel like distant cousins. Both are fundamentally about using vocalization or resonance to alter reality. Mortals lucky enough to be born dragonborn can learn this organically. The Dwemer tried to achieve the same thing through pure engineering. Fact 27. The Dwemer found the heart of Lorcan inside Red Mountain, and it changed everything. At some point in the First Era, Dwemer miners tunneling beneath Red Mountain in what is now Morrowind made the discovery that would define the rest of their civilization's history. They found the heart of Lorcan, the divine heart of the creator god, hurled into the earth thousands of years earlier as punishment for his perceived deception. The heart was identified by the chief tonal architect, Kagranok, who understood immediately that what they had found was an artifact of staggering, unprecedented power, a fragment of divine essence, the physical remnant of the act of creation itself. In a civilization that believed divinity was an engineering problem, finding the actual literal heart of a dead god was the equivalent of finding the original source code. If they could understand it, if they could harness it, they could prove finally and definitively that their philosophy had been right all along. Fact 28. Kagranok designed 3 tools specifically to interact with the heart, and all 3 still exist. Kagranok's genius and his catastrophic ambition produced 3 instruments: Sunder, Keening, and Wraithguard. Sunder was a hammer that could strike the heart in a way that severed portions of its power for use. Keening was a blade that could tune and direct those severed portions. Wraithguard was a gauntlet that protected the user from the enormous magical feedback that using the first 2 would produce. Together, the 3 tools allowed a wielder to interact with the heart directly, to draw on divine power without being immediately destroyed by it. Together, they were the implementation of Kagranak's plan to elevate the entire Dwemer race to godhood. All three tools still exist in the Fourth Era. Keening appears in Skyrim's main questline. Wraithguard was last seen in Morrowind. Sunder too. The fact that they persist while the civilization that made them does not is its own quiet commentary on what happened at Red Mountain. Fact 29. Kagranak's plan was to power a mechanical god called the Numidium and link his entire race to it. The brass god, the Numidium, a massive mechanical construct designed to be animated by the heart of Lorkhan that would serve as a focus for the divine ascension of the entire Dwemer civilization. Kagranak's book, called Divine Metaphysics, treated the creation of gods as an engineering specification. He was not asking for divine grace. He was writing a technical document. The plan, as far as historians can reconstruct it, was to connect the entire Dwemer race to the Numidium in a way that would elevate their collective essence, that would, through the mechanism of the heart's power channeled through the construct, transform the Dwemer from mortals into something genuinely divine. Fact 30. In 1E700, during the Battle of Red Mountain, every Dwemer in existence vanished simultaneously. At the Battle of Red Mountain, in the year 1E700, the First Era, year 700, the forces of the Dwemer and their Chimer enemies clashed in the largest battle of what was called the War of the First Council. In the middle of this battle, at a moment nobody outside the Dwemer leadership could have anticipated, Kagranak struck the heart of Lorkhan with his tools, and every single Dwemer disappeared. Not just in Vardenfell, not just in Morrowind, every Dwemer in all of Tamriel simultaneously, in the same instant. In Skyrim, in Hammerfell, in any ruin, any city, any open field. The Dwemer ruins of Bom's Amshend and Mournhold, when later investigators explored them, contained piles of ash next to weapons and armor, ash on chairs, ash in beds. The Dwemer did not flee. They did not transform slowly over time. Their bodies were reduced to ash or simply ceased to exist in a single moment, while their machinery continued operating exactly as it had before, as if nothing had happened. Fact 31. Only one Dwemer survived, because he was somewhere else when it happened. Yagrum Bagarn. He was the last known living Dwemer. When the disappearance occurred, he was traveling in what he calls an outer realm, a dimension outside Mundus. He returned to find his entire race erased from existence. He spent years searching for any survivor before contracting a disease called Corporus that left him unable to continue. By the time of the events of Morrowind, he is kept in a facility run by a member of the Tribunal, his disease managed but not cured, his vast knowledge of Dwemer engineering and philosophy serving as perhaps the last direct link to his civilization's understanding of itself. His theories on what happened to his people are the most informed in existence, and even he does not know for certain. The leading theories are that the Dwemer were incorporated into the Numidium itself, that their souls became the animating force of the brass construct, or that Kagranak's miscalculation scattered them across time or across dimensions, or that the act of striking the heart did not elevate them at all, but simply unmade them, erasing their existence as surely as if they had never been. The Dwemer set out to create a god. They may have succeeded in the most terrible way imaginable. Fact 32. Arniel Gain at the College of Winterhold accidentally replicated the Dwemer's fate. In a side quest that most players barely notice, a college scholar named Arniel Gain becomes obsessed with recreating the conditions of the Dwemer disappearance. He obtains Keening, one of Kagranak's tools, and performs a ritual using a charged soul gem in place of the actual heart of Lorkhan. The result is immediate and final. Arniel vanishes. He does not die. He does not leave behind ash. He simply ceases to be present in the mortal world in any normal way. His shade, a faint afterimage of him, occasionally appears to assist the Dragonborn afterward, suggesting he exists in some liminal state, neither dead nor fully present. He may have experienced the same displacement that the Dwemer experienced, on a smaller scale. His entire research arc serves as proof of two things: that what Kagranak did really did cause the Dwemer's disappearance, and that some knowledge should not be pursued regardless of how fascinating it is. Fact 33. Dwemer animunculi have been running for over 4,000 years with zero maintenance. The Centurions, Spheres, and Spider animunculi in Dwemer ruins. the constructs that attack on sight and patrol their eternal corridors, have been doing exactly that for 4 millennia. No fuel, no maintenance, no new instructions. They simply kept going after their creators vanished, because the tonal architecture that powers them was designed to be self-sustaining. Modern smiths and enchanters in the 4th era cannot replicate this. Not even close. The best human and elvish craftwork degrades over decades. Dwemer machinery runs over millennia. This is not just impressive engineering. It is evidence of a fundamental gap between Dwemer understanding of the world and everyone else's. They achieved something that crosses the line between technology and metaphysics. Constructs that are, in some sense, not merely machines, but participants in the ongoing tonal structure of reality itself. Fact 34. Blackreach was not built by the Dwemer. They found it and expanded it. The enormous underground cavern beneath Skyrim, with its artificial sun, its glowing mushrooms, its miles of Dwemer roads and cities, Blackreach was not originally a Dwemer construction. According to various lore fragments, the cavern already existed before the Dwemer arrived, and appears to have been occupied by others long before. What the Dwemer did was expand it, build into it, connect it to their network of underground cities, and make it one of the most impressive environments that exists anywhere beneath Tamriel's surface. The glowing fungi that light the darkness are not native Tamrielic species. They are unique to Blackreach, suggesting either that the Dwemer cultivated them specifically, or that the cavern has properties that enabled entirely unique life forms to develop. When you descend into Blackreach during the College of Winterhold questline and stand in its impossible scale, looking up at an artificial sun burning in a cavern that should not geometrically exist beneath the mountains of Skyrim, you are looking at what may be the single greatest engineering achievement in Tamriel's recorded history. Fact 35. A dragon named Volthuriol lives in Blackreach, and nobody knows why. Deep in Blackreach, if you shout at the golden sphere hanging in the air above the central platform, a dragon appears. Not a skeleton rising from a burial mound, not a dragon resurrected by Alduin. A living dragon, already there, already ancient, named Volthuriol, whose name in Dovazul means Dark Overlord Flame. He has apparently been living in Blackreach for a very long time. Dragons are creatures of the sky, of open wind and soaring distance. The idea of one living underground, in a cavern beneath Skyrim, is cosmologically strange. No explanation is offered, no text accounts for it. He is simply there, an ancient mystery inside a larger ancient mystery, and if you know how to call him, he will come. Part 4. The Snow Elves, the Falmer, and the Long Night of Ruin, Fact 36. The Snow Elves were a civilization of considerable sophistication before humanity arrived. Before the Atmarans, the ancestors of the Nords, migrated south from the frozen continent of Atmora, Skyrim was the domain of a people called the Snow Elves. They were pale, white-haired, and tall, physically similar to the Altmer, but distinct in their bearing and culture. They worshipped Auriel, the Altmer aspect of the dragon god of time. They built wayshrines and sanctuaries and places of natural beauty, particularly in the hidden valley called the Forgotten Vale. They were scholars, architects, and craftspeople. They were, by any reasonable standard, a civilization. It is important to hold that image clearly, because the Falmer you encounter in Skyrim's ruins, the blind, hissing, barely humanoid creatures that scuttle through the darkness, are what the Snow Elves became. The distance between those two things is the entire tragedy. Fact 37. The Night of Tears was not random violence. It may have been about the Eye of Magnus. In the Merethic era, the Atmoran settler Ysgramor had established a city called Sarthal, the first and largest human settlement in Skyrim. One night, the Snow Elves attacked and razed it to the ground. The only known survivors were Ysgramor and his 2 sons. This event, called the Night of Tears, is treated in most historical accounts as an act of unprovoked aggression that justified Ysgramor's subsequent campaign of vengeance. But a text called Night of Tears by the scholar Draenor Seleth suggests a different reading. Deep beneath Sarthal, during the College of Winterhold questline, players find the Eye of Magnus, an artifact of staggering power that predates conventional magic. The theory is that the Snow Elves knew the Eye was buried beneath Sarthal and attacked specifically to destroy it or reclaim it, because they understood that allowing humanity to possess it was existentially dangerous. The civilian massacre was the terrible collateral cost of a targeted military operation aimed at an artifact, not a people. This does not excuse what happened at Sarthal, it contextualizes it. The Snow Elves were not simply savage, they were afraid, or strategic, or both. Fact 38. Ysgramor wept tears of pure ebony when he heard what happened. The legend holds that when Ysgramor reached Atmora and told his people what had been done to Sarthal, he wept. And his tears, in the mythologized telling, were not normal tears. They were ebony, the hard volcanic glass that forms some of the most powerful weapons in the world. From those ebony tears he forged Wuthrad, his legendary battle axe, whose name means storm's tears in the ancient Atmoran tongue. The weapon's enchantment deals additional damage specifically to elves. It is literally made of grief, and it was wielded against the people who caused that grief. Fact 39. Ysgramor brought 500 companions, but each of the 500 was a legendary hero in their own right. The 500 companions of Ysgramor were not just a large army. Nordic legend records each of them individually as heroes worthy of their own sagas. They were not conscripts or common soldiers. They were the greatest warriors that Atmora, itself a cold, brutal world that bred toughness, could produce, gathered specifically for the purpose of returning to Skyrim. Each one's name and deeds were recorded. Modern Nords can name perhaps a handful of them. The original library of their exploits filled volumes. When Ysgramor's army landed at Sarek Head on the northern coast and began cutting south through Skyrim, they were not simply a military force. They were the founding population of what would become Nordic civilization, warrior settlers who fought while simultaneously building, clearing land, establishing settlements. The city of Windhelm was built in part by Snow Elf slaves captured during the campaign. The city of Whiterun was another early settlement rising from the same period. Nordic civilization in Skyrim grew directly from the blood and territory gained in Ysgramor's vengeance. Fact 40. The Companions were founded as an extermination force. The modern Companions, the honorable warrior guild based in Whiterun, neutral in politics, loyal to personal contracts, have an origin that their current members probably do not dwell on. The organization was literally founded to commit genocide. Ysgramor gathered the 500 specifically to ensure the complete destruction of the Snow Elf civilization. That was the mission, and they carried it out with extraordinary thoroughness. The institutional evolution from genocide army to honorable mercenary guild took millennia. The traditions, oaths, and philosophy of restraint that the Companions now embody are centuries removed from what the organization originally was. But the Companions' headquarters in Whiterun, the Jorvaskr Mead Hall, is built around the actual ship that carried Ysgramor's warriors across the sea. They dragged the boat inland from the coast and built around it. The vessel that launched one of history's more devastating campaigns of extermination is now the centerpiece of an organization proud of its neutrality and honor. Fact 41. The Snow Elves' last stand was at the Battle of the Moesring, and a child ended it. The Snow Elves, after Ysgramor's campaign drove them across the province, made their final stand on the island of Solstheim. At the Battle of the Moesring, they gathered under a leader known as the Snow Prince, who was widely considered the most formidable warrior among them. The battle was going badly for the human forces when the Snow Prince cut down a Nord woman named Jofrior. Her daughter, a child whose name was Finna, picked up her mother's fallen sword and threw it across the battlefield in grief and fury. It struck the Snow Prince through the chest, killing him. With their greatest warrior dead, the surviving Snow Elves fled underground. The fate of the most sophisticated elven civilization in Skyrim was decided by a child throwing a sword she could barely carry in the moment of losing her mother. Fact 42. The Dwemer enslaved the Snow Elves and deliberately blinded every single one of them. The Snow Elves who survived the war fled underground, seeking sanctuary with the Dwemer. As fellow elves, they hoped the Dwemer might take them in as refugees. The Dwemer did take them in, under conditions. The Snow Elves who accepted had to consume a toxic fungal substance that was almost certainly administered without full disclosure of its effects. The fungus permanently and completely destroyed their vision. Every Snow Elf who ate it was blinded, not temporarily, not partially. Their eyes were rendered permanently non-functional, and crucially, the effect did not stop with that generation. the toxin corrupted their biology at a genetic level. Every subsequent generation of their descendants was born blind. The Dwemer did not accidentally blind the Snow Elves. They deliberately engineered total heritable blindness into an entire people to make them utterly dependent. Dependent elves made better slaves. Fact 43. The Forgotten Vale is where the only surviving uncorrupted Snow Elves lived. Hidden behind Darkfall Cave in Skyrim, accessible only through the Dawnguard questline, the Forgotten Vale is a valley of such beauty it seems almost impossible. Frozen waterfalls, ancient way shrines to Ariel, architecture of graceful precision, built by people who understood how to make stone look like it was listening to the wind. This is what Snow Elf civilization looked like before the Dwemer's intervention. A small number of Snow Elves rejected the Dwemer's offer and remained pure, hidden, free, sighted. Their sanctuary in the Forgotten Vale was protected by their devotion to Ariel and by the sheer inaccessibility of the valley. Knight Paladin Gelibor, the sole survivor you meet, has been maintaining the way shrines for thousands of years, waiting for pilgrims who never came. He does not know what happened to the rest of his people. He thinks they may have simply continued their pilgrimage inward, deeper into devotion, and never returned. The reality is almost certainly grimmer, but Gelibor's faith has kept him here, tending lights that no one ever sees. When the Dragonborn walks through the Forgotten Vale, they are walking through the ghost of what could have been, the civilization that survived, the grace that was not destroyed, preserved in ice and silence while the rest of history went about its business. Part 5. The Thu'um, the Greybeards, and the Philosophy of Silence. Fact 44. The Thu'um was once used as standard military doctrine, before the Way of the Voice existed, before the Greybeards reframed the Thu'um as a sacred gift rather than a weapon. Entire armies of Nord warriors used shouts in battle. The Thu'um was not rare. It was not mystical. It was taught as a martial discipline, the way sword work or archery was taught. Armies of tongues, that is the term for Thu'um practitioners, coordinated voice attacks the way a modern army coordinates its formations. The battlefields of early Nord history were zones of reality-warping vocalization on an industrial scale. Fact 45. The Battle of Red Mountain changed everything about the Thu'um's cultural status. In the First Era, a massive battle took place at Red Mountain, in which a large force of Nord tongues suffered devastating defeat, despite their mastery of the voice. The battle went wrong in ways that direct Thu'um proficiency could not prevent, and the greatest voices of their generation died in a loss that shook the entire Norse world. Jurgen Windcaller, one of the greatest tongues alive, was among those who survived. He spent years in meditation afterward, trying to understand what had gone wrong. His conclusion, arrived at through 7 years of silence in High Hrothgar, was theological. The defeat was a message. The Thu'um was being misused. The gift of the dragon tongue was never meant to be a weapon of armies. It was meant for worship, for contemplation, for reverence of the world that this language encoded. By reducing it to a tactic, the Nords had dishonored something sacred, and the defeat was the consequence. Fact 46. Jurgen Windcaller spent 7 years in silence before founding the Greybeards' philosophy. The Way of the Voice did not emerge quickly from Windcaller's grief. He spent 7 consecutive years in meditation on the throat of the world before he felt he understood what the Thu'um required of its practitioners. His philosophy was simple in structure, but enormous in its implications. The voice was not a weapon. It was not a tool of war or politics. It was an expression of divine truth, meant to deepen the speaker's relationship with the world that truth had made. It should be used only when absolutely necessary and approached at all other times with reverent silence. His teachings were not immediately popular. Many Nords viewed restraint as cowardice, and Windcaller faced significant opposition. Over time, through the persuasive weight of his example, the philosophy won out, not through force but through the demonstration that mastery did not require constant use, and that true understanding of the Thu'um actually deepened by not speaking. Fact 47. The Greybeards' shout summoning the Dragonborn was heard across all of Skyrim simultaneously. When the Greybeards call for the Dragonborn at High Hrothgar, when they shout a single name into the sky, that shout is audible and physically palpable across the entire province. Guards comment on it. Jarls discuss it. Common people look up at the mountains and feel something they cannot name. This is not theatrical description in the game's writing. It is a precise mechanical fact. Every NPC in the game world has scripted dialogue acknowledging what they felt. The Greybeards used, for the purposes of calling attention, a fraction of their actual capability. Calling this a demonstration of restraint would be an understatement. If they spoke normally in the dragon tongue, with the full intention behind each word, they would reshape the landscape around them with every sentence. They communicate with the Dragonborn in ordinary speech, specifically because ordinary speech is the only safe register for someone who has not mastered the way of the voice. To speak Dovazul to the player character would be to risk destroying them. Fact 48. The Greybeards age dramatically more slowly than normal humans because of their mastery. The degree of their mastery over the Thu'um and the meditative practice associated with the way of the voice produces a side effect: dramatically slowed aging, not immortality. The Greybeards are mortal, but the time dilation of their existence, the degree to which deep immersion in the dragon tongue's reality-encoding properties changes the practitioner's relationship with normal time, means that a century for a Greybeard does not pass the same way as a century for an ordinary person. They have been at High Hrothgar for lifetimes. They remember things that are history to everyone else. And they experience time flowing differently than the mortals they occasionally interact with, which is part of why their perspective on political events is so detached. They are, in a very real sense, watching from a different temporal vantage point. Fact 49. Arngir speaks to the Dragonborn in normal speech as an act of deliberate accommodation. When Master Arngir addresses the Dragonborn in High Hrothgar, he is choosing to speak in a limited register specifically to protect you. His use of ordinary language is not a sign that he cannot do better. It is a sign that he has chosen to contain himself on your behalf. The casual conversation you are having with an elderly man in gray robes is actually taking place with someone who could literally alter the terrain of the mountain with a sentence. His patience, his measured delivery, the slight stiffness in how he phrases things. These are all evidence of a person choosing not to be what they actually are, for the sake of the smaller thing in front of them. Fact 50. Paarthurnax meditates on the word ro, balance, because it is what he needs most. When you first encounter Paarthurnax on the throat of the world, he is sitting with a single word carved in fire on the stone before him. The word is ro, the second word of unrelenting force, meaning balance or push steadiness. He explains that he meditates on this word because balance is what a dragon most needs and least naturally possesses. His entire philosophy of restraint is encoded in that single word, sitting in flames on a frozen mountaintop. He chose a word that describes his own constant struggle, and he stares at it daily. That is what thousands of years of self-work looks like, apparently. Fact 51. Tiber Septim studied under the Greybeards before conquering Tamriel. The man who would become the ninth divine, the founder of the Third Empire, the greatest conqueror in Tamrielic history, when he was still a young man, he came to High Hrothgar. He studied under the Greybeards, including Paarthurnax, who was the master of the Greybeards at that time. The emperors who came after Tiber Septim, the Dragonborn emperors of the Septim dynasty, apparently protected Paarthurnax from the Blade's desire to kill all dragons because of this connection. The Blade's anti-dragon ideology was moderated for centuries by the simple fact that the dynasty they served owed its philosophical formation to a dragon. Part 6. Talos, the Concordat, and the War Nobody Wins. Fact 52. Tiber Septim may have been three people fused into one. The Arcturian Heresy, a controversial text available in the Elder Scrolls universe, presents an alternative history of Tiber Septim's rise that challenges the standard imperial narrative. According to this theory, what we know as Tiber Septim is not simply one man who achieved everything attributed to him. He is the convergence of three distinct figures: Hayalti Early Beard, the young Breton-born military genius who became the emperor; Zurin Arctus, the powerful battle mage who served at his side and was instrumental in reactivating the Numidium; and Wulfharth Ash King, an ancient and legendary Nordic hero who had died and been reborn multiple times. The theory holds that Zurin Arctus was somehow merged with Wulfharth, and that this merged entity combined with Hjalti to produce a composite divine figure whose soul had the necessary weight and complexity to actually achieve ascension. This remains unverified, contested even within the world of the game, and Bethesda has deliberately maintained the ambiguity. But it provides one answer to the question of how a mortal could accumulate enough spiritual mass to become a genuine god. Not by being exceptional in one lifetime, but by being the crystallization of multiple exceptional beings into a single identity. Fact 53. The white gold concordat was designed to be humiliating enough to cause rebellion. In 4E175, after 4 years of devastating war between the Empire and the Aldmeri Dominion, a war in which the imperial city itself fell temporarily, Emperor Titus Mede II signed the white gold concordat. The terms included the cession of large territories, the dissolution of the Blades, and the complete banning of Talos worship across the Empire. The Empire was exhausted. It accepted the terms because the alternative appeared to be annihilation. Documents found in the Thalmor embassy during the diplomatic immunity quest reveal the Thalmor's actual view of this outcome. They did not sign the concordat to achieve their stated demands. They signed it because they understood that the demands, particularly the ban on Talos worship, were intolerable enough to most Nords that the ban would guarantee civil unrest. The concordat was not peace. It was a slow-burning mechanism for keeping both the Empire and Skyrim divided, weakened, and unable to mount effective resistance when the Thalmor decided to press their advantage again. Fact 54. Ulfric's Stormcloak is classified in Thalmor documents as an asset. The Thalmor dossier found in the embassy during the main quest is one of the most important documents in the game, and most players read it quickly and move on. What it says, in diplomatic language, is that Ulfric was captured during the Great War and interrogated. During that interrogation, information was extracted that proved useful to the Dominion. Since his release, Ulfric has functioned as what the document calls an uncooperative asset, meaning he does not know he is being used. His sincere belief in Nordic independence makes him the most useful kind of instrument. He acts entirely from genuine conviction, while his actions serve the Dominion's interests precisely. The Thalmor do not want Ulfric to win. They do not want the Empire to win. The ideal outcome is exactly what is happening. A civil war that drains both sides indefinitely, bleeding soldiers and resources that could otherwise be directed against the Dominion when the inevitable Second Great War arrives. Fact 55. Ulfric killed High King Torygg using the Thu'um, and whether this was honorable is genuinely debatable. The event that started the Stormcloak Rebellion was Ulfric's challenge to High King Torygg in solitude. He challenged the young king to a traditional Nordic duel, a format that both participants were bound by custom to accept. Traditional Nordic dueling protocol tested martial prowess. The challenge was meant to determine who was the stronger warrior. Ulfric used the Thu'um. He shouted Torygg across the room, and then, while the king was incapacitated, killed him with a sword. Depending on your perspective, this was either brilliant, a warrior using every available resource, just as the ancient Nords had used the voice in battle, or deeply dishonorable, because bringing overwhelming supernatural force against someone who had no defense against it made the concept of a fair test meaningless. The duel was supposed to measure martial ability, and the Thu'um is not an ability most Nords possess. The civil war that follows is, in part, an argument about this specific question, and it has no clean answer. Fact 56. The Markarth incident is what transformed Ulfric from a political activist into a militant. Before the Civil War, Ulfric's campaign for Talos worship rights was largely political and non-violent. The turning point was the Markarth incident. When the Great War pulled Imperial forces away from the Reach, the native Reachmen, the indigenous people who had lived there before Nordic conquest, took back their city and established their own independent governance. The occupation was, by most accounts, relatively peaceful and fair. When the Empire needed the Reach back, it had no soldiers to retake it. Ulfric stepped in with his militia, retook Markarth, and as the price of his assistance demanded the right to worship Talos openly. The Empire granted this, hoping the Dominion would not find out. When the Dominion did find out and demanded the arrest of the Stormcloaks responsible, the Empire complied, and Ulfric spent 7 years in an Imperial prison. The experience of being used and then betrayed by the Empire hardened him completely. The radicalization of moderate Reachmen into the violent Forsworn movement was a direct consequence of the same political maneuvering that imprisoned Ulfric. Fact 57. The Forsworn are not bandits. They are an indigenous insurgency. The Forsworn, the wild enemies with bone and feather armor who attack travelers in the Reach, are consistently presented in the game as dangerous criminals. And they are dangerous, but their history reframes them entirely. They are the descendants of the original Reachmen, the indigenous Breton-blooded people who lived in the Reach before the Nords conquered it. The government they established during the Great War, when imperial forces were absent, was recognized and functional. When it was violently suppressed with Ulfric's help, and its leaders killed or enslaved, the survivors and their descendants formed the Forsworn. Their attacks on Nordic settlers are not random violence. They are a guerrilla insurgency by displaced people fighting to reclaim land their ancestors inhabited for generations. The game offers no clean resolution to this because there is no clean resolution. Their cause is legitimate, their methods are often horrific, and the political situation that produced them involved betrayals from every direction. Fact 58. The Civil War has no right answer, and this was Bethesda's deliberate design choice. Both sides of the Skyrim Civil War have legitimate grievances. The Empire's position that a united Tamriel is the only realistic defense against the Thalmor is strategically sound, but requires accepting ongoing oppression of the thing that makes Nords distinctively Nordic. The Stormcloak position, that Skyrim must be free to worship its own gods and govern itself, is philosophically admirable but tactically disastrous, since an isolated Skyrim is exactly what the Thalmor want. Every soldier killed in the Civil War, whether Stormcloak or Imperial, is one fewer soldier available when the Dominion moves again. The game presents this with genuine honesty. Neither side is made to look clearly superior. The in-game historian characters, the Greybeards, and the Thalmor documents all suggest that the conflict was manufactured to produce exactly this kind of mutual exhaustion. Choosing a side is a moral decision with no clean answer, and the game respects the player enough to let both choices stand without rewarding one with a clearly better outcome. Part 7. The Daedric Princes, Their Realms, and the Gifts They Give. Fact 59. The 16 Daedric Princes each control a sphere that defines their entire identity. Unlike the Aedra, whose identities were partially transformed by the act of creation, the Daedric Princes have never changed in the most fundamental sense. Each one represents a domain, not just rules over it, but embodies it. Azura represents dusk, dawn, and the magic of transitions between states. Boethia represents deceit and the betrayal of power. Clavicus Vile is wishes and the corruption of desire. Hircine is the hunt and the mastery of the animal state. Malakath is oaths broken, the spurned and the betrayed, the strength found in being cast out. Mephala is secrets, sex, and murder. Molag Bal is domination and the act of violating another's will. Namira is revulsion and the ancient darkness. Nocturnal is night and luck and the hidden. Periite is tasks, order, and disease in a minor key. Sanguine is hedonism. Sheogorath is madness. Vermina is nightmares. Mehrunes Dagon is destruction, change, and revolution. Meridia is light and life. Hermaeus Mora is knowledge and fate. These are not hobbies. They are not departments. Each prince is the living definition of their sphere. They think in it, breathe in it, want through it, and their realms are its physical expression. Fact 60. Molag Bal created the first vampire through an act of violation. Vampirism in the Elder Scrolls universe was not invented or discovered. It was inflicted. Molag Bal, the prince of domination and enslavement, created the first vampire by violating a mortal woman in a terrible act whose exact details the lore deliberately obscures. He did this to corrupt mortal society, to create predators who would feed on their own kind while struggling with the humanity they had lost. The condition then spread through blood, creating a lineage of corruption descending from that original act. Pure-blooded vampires, like Harkon's line in the Dawnguard DLC, trace their ancestry closer to that original source, which grants them superior abilities and the vampire lord transformation. Common vampirism is the disease diluted through countless generations. Every vampire that has ever existed carries within their condition the echo of that original violation. They are both victims of it and extensions of it. This is why Molag Bal has particular power over vampires, and why the Dawnguard's struggle against the Volkihar clan has a theological dimension beyond just monster hunting. Fact 61. Sheogorath in Skyrim may literally be the hero of Kvatch from Oblivion. The Daedric prince you meet in the Mind of Madness quest in Skyrim, the cheerful, cheese-loving, dangerously unpredictable Sheogorath, has dialogue that strongly suggests he is not the original Daedric Prince of Madness at all. He references the events of the Oblivion Crisis in ways that only someone who personally experienced them would know. He mentions defeating Mehrunes Dagon. He refers to things in the past tense that, if he were the eternal Sheogorath, would be simply eternal facts rather than memories. The theory, supported by the Shivering Isles expansion to Oblivion, is that the hero of Kvatch, the player character from Oblivion, underwent the process of mantling Sheogorath at the end of that expansion, becoming the Prince of Madness so completely that reality could not tell the difference. The original Sheogorath, who was Jiggalag cursed into madness, was freed from the cycle. The hero stepped into the vacancy. And now, in Skyrim's timeline, the Prince of Madness you encounter is a former mortal who performed divinity so thoroughly that the cosmic structure accepted them as the real thing. Fact 62. Hermaeus Mora is arguably the most dangerous prince because he collects souls not through horror but through curiosity. Mehrunes Dagon is terrifying because he wants to destroy everything. Molag Bal is terrifying because he wants to dominate and violate everything. But Hermaeus Mora seduces through the thing that scholars and mages and curious people love most, the promise of more knowledge. His realm, Apocrypha, is an infinite library. Every book ever written exists there. Every book that has not yet been written exists there too. The black books scattered across Tamriel are portals to his realm, and reading them grants genuine power, but each one also tightens the reader's connection to Mora, making them incrementally more his. By the time someone realizes they are being collected, they are usually already too deeply invested to stop. Mora does not threaten or coerce in the obvious way. He offers exactly what intellectually driven mortals want most. The horror of his realm is that the infinite library is staffed by the ghosts of people who came there seeking knowledge and never left. Not because they were trapped, but because they were too fascinated to go. Fact 63. The Ogma Infinium does not give knowledge. It overwrites the self to make room for it. Hermaeus Mora's signature gift to the mortal world is the Ogma Infinium, a book made of mortal skins that allows a reader to instantly master entire categories of ability. In gameplay, reading it grants a significant boost to skills in one of three paths. In lore, what actually happens to the reader is considerably more disturbing. The knowledge does not simply flow in and add to who the reader is. It is forcibly installed, overwriting the neural pathways and memories that previously occupied that mental space to make room for the new information. You do not read the Ogma Infinium and become smarter. You read it and become different. The person who opened the book is partially gone when the book closes. Mora does not give knowledge freely. He trades current identity for expanded capability. Every person who has read the Infinium is, in some small but real way, more his than they were before. Fact 64. The Ebony Blade feeds specifically on betrayal, not simply violence. Mephalah's artifact does not grow stronger from random killing. It grows stronger when used to murder people who trust the wielder. Friends, followers, spouses, people who have expressed loyalty or care for the character wielding the blade. Each betrayal, each murder of someone who considers you a companion, charges the weapon further until it reaches its maximum capacity. This is the most direct expression of Mephalah's sphere that exists in the game. Secrets, sexual intrigue, and the specifically sexual political act of betrayal. The weapon does not reward honest combat. It rewards the exact act of violating trust. Using it fully requires becoming the living definition of treachery, and the game does not prevent you from doing exactly that. Fact 65. Namira rewards cannibalism, and the quest to obtain her ring forces the player to eat a corpse. The Prince of Revulsion, Ancient Darkness, and Things Considered Beyond the Pale offers a ring that, mechanically, provides stamina regeneration and the ability to feed on human corpses for health. The quest to obtain it involves participating in a ritual feast in the catacombs beneath Markarth. The thing being eaten is a person. This is perhaps the single most morally confrontational moment in the base game of Skyrim. Not a combat choice, not a political alignment, but a dietary one. Namira's sphere is precisely the things that cross lines that most people will not cross. Her gift is explicitly conditional on crossing one of the clearest lines that exists. Fact 66. Nocturnal does not demand horrific sacrifice. She demands devotion and the occasional theft. The Thieves Guild's patron deity, Nocturnal, the Daedric prince of night and luck, has an arrangement with her mortal followers that is, by Daedric standards, almost civilized. She blesses the guild with supernatural luck. Doors open easier, guards look the wrong way at the wrong moment, locks turn smoothly, impossible scores become possible scores. In exchange, she expects devotion, the maintenance of a pact, and the service of skilled thieves who will occasionally do things she finds interesting. She does not ask for blood sacrifice. She does not require anyone to become a monster. She simply asks her followers to embrace the darkness they were already living in, and to do so with skill. The skeleton key, her artifact, does not belong in mortal hands permanently. Returning it to her realm at the end of the Thieves Guild quest line is not losing something. It is completing an exchange that began long before the player's involvement. Part 8. The Dark Brotherhood. Murder as Theology, Fact 67. The Dark Brotherhood's founding began with a woman killing her own children. The Night Mother, the mummified corpse that travels with the Brotherhood, that speaks to the listener through the Void, that serves as the spiritual center of the entire organization, was once simply a Dunmer woman who lived in a small village where the city of Breville now stands in Cyrodiil. The exact date of her life is debated, but she was alive sometime in the Second Era, after the dissolution of the Morag Tong in Cyrodiil following the assassination of the potentate. She claimed to hear the voice of Sithis himself. The Dreadfather, she said, was displeased. The Void was hungry. She was told she had a destiny. And then Sithis came to her bedchamber and fathered 5 children with her. 2 years later, she murdered all 5 of them. She killed her children and sent their souls to Sithis in the Void. Her neighbors, horrified, burned her house and killed her in return. 30 years later, a man heard her voice coming from the Void, and she charged him with founding a new Assassin's Guild devoted not to Mephala, as the Morag Tong had been, but to Sithis directly. That man was the first listener. That guild was the Dark Brotherhood. Every contract the Brotherhood has ever taken traces its spiritual lineage back to those 5 murdered children. The organization was built on the foundation of the most personal possible betrayal. And in the Brotherhood's theology, this is not a horror to overcome. It is the origin story to revere. Fact 68. Sithis is not a Daedric prince. He is the Void itself. The Daedra are beings with personalities, desires, and spheres. Sithis is not that. Sithis is the interplay of Anu and Padomai's negative force, or, more precisely, the personification of absolute nothingness, the primordial void that preceded all existence. He is not a character in the story the way Molag Bal or Hermaeus Mora are characters. He is closer to a concept that has, in the Brotherhood's religious framework, been given a name and a kind of agency. The Night Mother serves as the only conduit capable of interpreting Sithis' will, because Sithis himself has no will in any conventional sense. He is entropy. He is ending. He is the void into which all things eventually dissolve. This makes the Dark Brotherhood's theology genuinely alien. They are not serving a god who has preferences and rewards loyalty. They are serving the concept of dissolution itself, using murder as a way of hastening the return of all things to nothingness. Every kill is a sacrament to the idea that nothing lasts. They are not worshiping something that will reward them. They are worshiping the inevitable end and finding meaning in being its instruments. Fact 69. The 5 tenets are not just rules. They are religious doctrine whose violation invokes a divine response. The Dark Brotherhood's 5 tenets: never dishonor the Night Mother, never betray the Brotherhood, never disobey orders, never steal from a brother or sister, never kill a brother or sister, are presented as operational rules for the Guild's security, but their status in the Brotherhood's theology is something closer to sacrament. Breaking them doesn't just risk professional consequences, it is said to invoke the wrath of Sithis, which is not described as a metaphor. Astrid's eventual decision to betray the Brotherhood to the Empire, breaking the most fundamental of the tenets in exchange for her own safety, does not end with the Empire's protection. It ends with the Brotherhood's near-total destruction and her own death. Whether this is the consequence of bad decisions in a purely mundane cause-and-effect chain, or whether the wrath of Sithis is a genuine divine response to desecration, the outcome is the same. The tenets protect the Brotherhood from itself. When its leadership violates them, the organization collapses. Fact 70. Cicero's journals document the transformation from a competent assassin to a person broken by decades of solitary devotion. Cicero, the eccentric, jester-dressed keeper of the Night Mother's coffin, is easy to dismiss as comic relief or as a dangerous eccentric. His journals, scattered through Skyrim's world, tell a different story. In the earliest entries, he is measured, professional, competent, and genuinely committed. He is a skilled assassin who takes his role as the Night Mother's keeper seriously. As years pass and the Brotherhood contracts around him, members dying, sanctuaries closing, the organization in Cyrodiil reducing to just Cicero and the Night Mother's corpse, the entries become increasingly unhinged. He has been alone for years with a mummified corpse. His only companion is a body that he speaks to as if it will answer, because he believes it will. His isolation drove him to madness, but his madness did not diminish his faith. He maintained the rituals, tended the body, protected the tenets with no one to enforce them, talked to the Night Mother for over a decade in one-sided conversation, because he genuinely believed she was listening, and because the alternative was that everything he had given his life to was simply nothing. When the Night Mother finally speaks to someone, speaks to the Dragonborn, Cicero's reaction is not jealousy, it is relief. The kind of relief that only comes after a very long time of not knowing whether anyone could hear. Fact 71. Shadowmere is over 200 years old and has never naturally died. The black horse with glowing red eyes given by the Dark Brotherhood is not simply an unusual horse. The same Shadowmere appears in Oblivion's Dark Brotherhood questline, over 200 years before the events of Skyrim. This is the same horse, or the same entity in equine form. Her nature is never fully explained. The most common interpretation is that she has some connection to Sithis or to the Night Mother, that she is not quite mortal, that her near immortality is a gift or property related to the void itself. She can die in combat and then rise again from the waters of a particular pool. She serves the Brotherhood's members with apparent loyalty that transcends normal equine understanding. She is, in the quiet way of many Skyrim's strangest details, something ancient and unexplained that keeps doing exactly what it has always done. Fact 72. The Black Sacrament is a self-selecting mechanism, not just a ritual. Performing the Black Sacrament, constructing an effigy of the intended victim, stabbing it with a knife bound with flesh, chanting the incantation while surrounded by the elements of death, is not something a casual person decides to do. It requires specific knowledge, genuine conviction, and a willingness to engage with something that most people find viscerally repulsive. The Brotherhood does not advertise, does not recruit in public, and does not offer a menu of services anyone can find. Clients come to them through the Black Sacrament specifically because the ritual serves as a filter. Only someone who genuinely, deeply, with full understanding of what they are asking, desires someone's death, enough to perform this particular ritual with sincerity, can contact the Brotherhood. This protects the organization from casual requests, from law enforcement traps, and from the morally ambiguous cases where someone might regret the call. By the time you reach the point of actually performing the Black Sacrament, you have made a decision. The Brotherhood does not accept anything less than that kind of commitment. Part 9. Sovngarde, Shore, and the Shape of What Comes After. Facta 73. Sovngarde exists within Aetherius, the same realm where all magic originates. The Nordic afterlife is not in Oblivion, not in some separate divine dimension. Sovngarde is a subdivision of Aetherius, the immortal plane, the realm that exists on the other side of the holes that Magnus and the Magna Gay tore in the sky when they fled. Aetherius is where pure magical energy originates. It is where the divines reside in their most potent forms. It is the source of all the magicka that flows through Nirn's sky wounds into the mortal world. And it is also, in its Nordic expression, the realm of the honored dead. This means that when a Nord dies with valor and goes to Sovngarde, they are going to the same place where magic comes from. The afterlife and the source of divine power are the same location. The warriors feasting in Shore's Hall of Valor are dwelling in the same substance as the light through the stars. Fact 74. Shore is Lorcan, the creator-trickster god who was punished for making the world. In the Nordic pantheon, the figure called Shore occupies the same cosmic position that Lorcan occupies in other traditions. The elves largely hate and fear Lorcan as the being who tricked them into sacrificing their divine power to make the mortal world. The Imperials have a complex, respectful mythology around him. The Nords deified him as Shor, the god who took their side in the ancient conflict between men and Mirror, who created Sovngarde specifically as a reward for those who lived and died with honor, and whose empty throne sits at the center of the Hall of Valor. The throne is empty because Shor is not there in any form that can be encountered. Whether he is genuinely absent or simply present in a way that mortal perception cannot register is left open. But the structure of Sovngarde, the hall, the feast, the fighting that never ends in real injury, the company of all the heroes who ever lived, this is Lorkhan's gift to humanity. The being who cost the Aedra their divine fullness created the most beautiful afterlife in the game as an apology, or a thank you, or simply an expression of genuine love for the mortals his scheme produced. Fact 75. Tsune guards the way to Sovngarde and must be defeated in combat by every soul who arrives. Tsune, the ancient Nordic god of trials against adversity, died honorably in the Dawn era while serving as Shor's shield companion. In death, Shor appointed him to stand at the Whalebone Bridge and test the worthiness of every soul seeking entry to the Hall of Valor. This is not symbolic. Every Nordic warrior who dies must defeat Tsune in single combat before being permitted to enter. Not as a barrier of cruelty, but as a validation, a final acknowledgement that the life they lived was worthy of the company they are about to join. When the Dragonborn arrives in Sovngarde while still living, which should be impossible, Tsune tests them as he tests every other soul. The fact that a living person can make this crossing and defeat him confirms something important about the Dragonborn's nature. They are not quite fully mortal. They are something between the two states that the Whalebone Bridge spans. Fact 76. Both Stormcloak and Imperial soldiers end up in the same Hall of Valor. In Sovngarde, if you look carefully, you will find the spirits of soldiers from both sides of the Civil War, Stormcloak warriors and Imperial legionnaires alike, feasting and fighting together, without the political distinctions that divided them in life. Shor, it seems, has no interest in the earthly causes his chosen warriors fought for. He is interested only in the quality of how they fought and the honesty of how they died. The Civil War that seemed so urgent and consequential while it was happening simply evaporates in the face of the larger picture. Both sets of soldiers are judged on the same grounds. They all end up in the same hall. This is either a beautiful ecumenism or a gentle suggestion that the things people die for are not as significant as the fact of dying with genuine conviction. Possibly both. Fact 77. Lycanthropy prevents Nords from entering Sovngarde because the beast blood corrupts the soul. This is the central tragedy of Kodlak Whitemane's arc in the Companions' quest line. The Harbinger of the Companions is infected with lycanthropy, a condition he accepted earlier in his life as part of joining the Circle, the inner group of the Companions. By the time the player meets him, he has come to understand something terrible. When a lycanthrope dies, their soul does not go to Sovngarde. It goes to Hircine's hunting grounds, the Daedric prince of the Hunt's realm of oblivion, where werewolves hunt for eternity, which sounds thrilling until you realize that Hircine does not release his prizes, and that this replaces, permanently, whatever afterlife the person might otherwise have had. For a Nord who has lived honorably, who has earned a place in Shor's Hall by every conventional measure, the prospect of dying and going not to Sovngarde, but to Hircine's eternal chase, being denied the reunion with other honored Nords, being denied the feast and the company and the rest, is a spiritual catastrophe. Kodlak's later life was defined by his search for a cure. His funeral quest is not about honoring a warrior, it is about rescuing one. Fact 78. The Soul Cairn is where people go when their souls are trapped in black soul gems. Everyone in Tamriel knows that soul gems are used for enchanting. Many people know that black soul gems can trap human souls specifically. Relatively few people stop to think about what happens to those human souls after the enchantment is made and the gem is spent. The Soul Cairn, the desolate purple-gray wasteland accessible through the Dawnguard quest line, is the answer. It is the afterlife for souls that were intercepted on their way to their intended destination and trapped in gems instead. Every enchanted weapon, every suit of armor powered by a black soul gem, every piece of magical equipment created using a captured human soul. Each of these objects represents a person who was supposed to go somewhere else after death, to Sovngarde or the far shores or wherever their life's choices pointed them. and was instead rerouted into a gray eternity in a plane that belongs to no one and goes nowhere. The soul cairn is spiritual theft made geography. It is an afterlife made of other people's stolen endings. Fact 79. The Reaper guards the soul cairn and may be its warden, not its master. Deep in the soul cairn, accessible only after finding 3 Reaper gem fragments scattered through the zone, is a boss encounter with a creature called the Reaper. He is clearly not a random monster. He has a name designation, a specific lair, a summoning mechanism. His existence raises interesting cosmological questions. If the soul cairn is not governed by any Daedric prince, which appears to be the case, then what is the Reaper, and who sent him there? He may be the actual warden of this plane, a construct or being of unknown origin whose function is to keep the trapped souls from escaping or causing disruption. Who built the soul cairn? Who authorized its existence? The Reaper suggests there is structure here, design, intention, which means someone made this place deliberately, and the question of why is not answered. Fact 80. Alduin was consuming the souls in Sovngarde to grow stronger. This is one of Alduin's most disturbing attributes. When he arrived in Sovngarde in his effort to rebuild his power, he began systematically eating the souls that existed there. Souls that had already died and arrived in their promised rest were being consumed by the World Eater to fuel his own return to dominance. This is why the fog that shrouds Sovngarde when you arrive is so thick. Alduin generated it to conceal his feeding. The heroes you speak with in the Hall of Valor who seem diminished, who speak in urgently depleted terms, are experiencing the effects of Alduin's predation on their realm. He was not just a threat to the living, he was actively dismantling the afterlife. Part 10. The Hidden Politics, Forsworn, Discrimination, and Skyrim's Underground Fact 81. Windhelm is the oldest city in Skyrim, and it is also a monument to institutional racism. Ysgramor himself founded Windhelm. It is the oldest continuously occupied settlement in the province, a city of such ancient history that its stones carry the weight of everything Skyrim has ever been. And it is also a place where dark elves are confined to a district called the Grey Quarter, where the conditions are deliberately maintained as degraded and under-resourced, and where Argonians are not permitted inside the city walls at all, forced to live on the docks regardless of the weather. The dark elves who live in the Grey Quarter have been in Skyrim for 200 years, since the Red Year of 4E5, when Red Mountain's eruption devastated Morrowind and sent refugees across the province. That is multiple generations. There are dark elves in Windhelm who were born there, whose parents were born there, who have never seen Morrowind. They are not immigrants in any meaningful sense. They are residents who have faced systematic discrimination longer than most Nordic families have had their current holdings. The Grey Quarter's squalor is not poverty that accumulated by accident. It was built deliberately and maintained deliberately. Fact 82. Ulfric Stormcloak, champion of Nordic freedom, does nothing about the discrimination in his own city. The Civil War's protagonist on the Stormcloak side is fighting, he says, for the freedom of the Nordic people, for their right to worship their gods, govern themselves, live without foreign oppression. The Grey Quarter exists in his city. The dockside exclusion of Argonians exists in his city. His freedom, it turns out, is specifically Nordic freedom, which does not extend to the non-Nordic people who have lived in Skyrim for as long as most living Nords can remember. This is not a subtle game. Ulfric is not a bad faith character. He genuinely believes in what he fights for, but his vision of Skyrim does not include making room for everyone who already lives there. The nationalism that fuels his rebellion has a specific shape, and that shape excludes people who are not Nord. Fact 83. The Thieves Guild marks buildings all over Skyrim with a secret symbol system that only members can read. Shadow marks, small symbols carved into the stone of buildings and doorways across Skyrim's cities, are the Thieves Guild's invisible communication network. Each mark encodes specific information. This building is safe for members. This location has been robbed. This dwelling belongs to a dangerous mark. This is an escape route. The marks appear throughout every major city and many rural locations, visible to anyone but readable only by people who know the code. Players who learn to recognize the marks gain tactical information that guards and civilians cannot access. The system requires no verbal communication, no written notes that could be intercepted, no meetings that could be observed. It is purely visual, appearing as casual vandalism or stonework to the uninitiated, and functioning as a comprehensive intelligence network for those who understand it. The guild's influence is measured not just in coins or stolen items, but in the invisible architecture of information they have built across the province's surfaces. Fact 84. Maven Blackbriar functionally controls Riften regardless of who officially governs it. The Jarl nominally rules Riften. Maven Blackbriar actually runs it. She controls the Thieves Guild, has maintained relationships with the Dark Brotherhood, owns the brewery that employs a large portion of the city's workforce, and has leverage over virtually every significant figure in Riften's power structure, including the Jarl's own steward. Her control is not based on any official title. It is based on controlling resources, information, and the implied or explicit threat of violence from two different criminal organizations. This is the game being direct about how power actually works. The official political structure of Riften, the Jarl's authority, the Hold's governance, the visible chain of command, is theater. The real decisions are made in the Blackbriar Manor or whispered through the Thieves Guild. If the Imperials win the Civil War, Maven becomes Jarl, finally giving official title to the authority she has always possessed. Her elevation is not a change in who controls Riften. It is just a change in whether the control is officially acknowledged. Fact 85. The Khajiit caravans outside Skyrim's cities are intelligence networks for Elsewhere. The traveling Khajiit merchants who set up outside city walls, never permitted inside, always on the margins, always moving, are not simply exotic traders. Their movement across the province, their access to everyone who passes through, their position in trade networks that cross political boundaries, all of this makes them ideal information gatherers for Elsewhere's political interests. They see everything, they speak with everyone, they appear harmless and economically motivated. Some caravans also distribute skooma, the addictive narcotic derived from moon sugar, which creates dependent information sources among the Nordic population. The supply of an illegal substance generates compromised informants and grateful customers. The scheme, if deliberately operated this way, is extraordinarily elegant. Maintain commercial legitimacy as cover, gather intelligence from compromised sources, report political and military developments back to Elsewhere's leadership. Players buying potions from Risad or Carjo are participating in something considerably more complex than a commerce exchange. Fact 86. Jari Ra and the Riften dockside Argonians have built their own community in literal exclusion. The Argonian community, forced to live on Riften's docks, outside the city, in cold wooden structures not intended as permanent homes, have created something remarkable under conditions designed to prevent it. They have community. They have relationships. They have pride that does not depend on the city's recognition. When you speak with them, they are not broken. They are angry, and they are right to be angry, and they are living fully anyway in the space that was left to them. This is not a story the game tells loudly. It is present in the texture of brief interactions, in the way characters speak about the city behind them, in the specific detail that the exclusion is explicit policy rather than geographic circumstance. The Argonians on the dock are not there because dock workers need to live near docks. They are there because they are not allowed to be anywhere else. And they built a life there anyway. Part 11. Strange details, hidden places, and the things nobody told you. Fact 87. The vendor inventories in Skyrim physically exist in hidden chests buried under each city. When you visit a merchant in Skyrim, the items they are carrying do not exist in some abstract game data space. They are physically present in an actual chest, buried beneath the game's terrain, usually underground below the city itself. The merchant's inventory updates because their chest updates. This means that through various terrain manipulation techniques, the chests can theoretically be accessed directly, bypassing the merchant entirely. The easiest to reach in the base game is a Khajiit caravan chest accessible near the Ironbreaker mine in Dawnstar, a spot where the terrain geometry allows a character to interact with the buried container without any special tools. This was an unintended design exposure, a window into how inventory was physically implemented that became one of the most referenced exploits in the game's decade of active play. Fact 88. Skyrim's map is not a static image. It renders the game world in real time. When you open the map in Skyrim, you are not looking at a pre-rendered image of the province. You are looking at the actual three-dimensional game world from above, rendered in real time. This means that visual effects present in the game world appear on the map. If you absorb a dragon soul near the map's visible range, A glow appears on it. Major spell effects can register. The day and night cycle affects the map's light, because the map is actually looking at the same sky the game is using. This is technically demanding and largely invisible to players who do not think about what they are looking at. It is also a quiet expression of design philosophy. The map is not an abstraction of Skyrim. It is Skyrim, seen from further away. Fact 89. Eric the Slayer is in the game as a permanent memorial to a fan who died before it released. In the village of Rorikstead, a farm boy named Eric dreams of becoming an adventurer. He can be found helping his father on their farm, yearning to see the world. Through a small quest, convincing his father to let him go, paying for his equipment, the player can help him leave Rorikstead and become a follower. He will refer to himself as Eric the Slayer. He is enthusiastic, earnest, and notably inexperienced. He can also die permanently if not protected carefully. Eric the Slayer was named after Eric West, a fan of the Elder Scrolls who was diagnosed with terminal cancer and passed away before Skyrim's November 2011 release date. He had asked Bethesda if they might include something in the game in his memory. They created Eric specifically for him, a character whose entire arc is about being given the chance to have the adventures he dreamed of. The tragic irony that Eric the Slayer is not essential, that he can die, has been noted by many players. Some find it inappropriate, others see it as fitting. Either way, somewhere in a small village in the Whiterun Hold, a young man with a borrowed sword is ready to follow you into danger, and his name is a promise kept to someone who never got to hold the controller. Fact 90. The notched pickaxe at the throat of the World Summit is a reference to Marcus Notch Persson, creator of Minecraft. At the absolute apex of the throat of the world, above the normal playable space, accessible only through careful terrain navigation, sits a unique pickaxe with a slightly unusual name. The notched pickaxe references Marcus Persson, the creator of Minecraft, who went by the nickname Notch. Both Skyrim and Minecraft launched in November of 2011. The pickaxe is Bethesda acknowledging, with evident warmth, that two very different games could launch in the same season and respect each other. The item sits at the highest point in the entire game, which is either the most generous compliment or the subtlest joke about reaching the top, depending on how you read it. Fact 91. The sleeping tree near Whiterun is not actually a tree. It may be an alien organism or vessel. The large, unique-looking tree near Whiterun that produces unusually powerful skooma sap is described in the game as genuinely unexplained. The area around it contains organic material unlike anything else in Skyrim. The tree itself does not behave the way trees behave. It does not grow or change or respond to seasons. The most commonly accepted interpretation among players and lore enthusiasts is that it is not a tree at all. It is something that crashed into Skyrim from outside, possibly another world, possibly another dimension, and took root in the soil in a way that superficially resembles plant behavior while being fundamentally alien. The Khajiit merchant Ulag is camped near it at all times, purchasing the sap to process into skooma. He does not care about the cosmological strangeness of what he is harvesting. It produces a commercially viable product, and that is sufficient. Even extra-dimensional alien life forms get commodified in Skyrim's economy. Fact 92. The Gilder Green in Whiterun died because it was loved too intensely for too long. The dead tree at the center of Whiterun's marketplace is not old or diseased. It was killed by centuries of worshippers carving their prayers and devotion into its bark. Each individual carving was a small wound. Each person who cut their thanks or hopes or grief into the tree intended an act of reverence. Collectively, across generations, the accumulated cuts weakened the tree until it could not survive. The Gildergreen was literally loved to death. The quest to replace it, either cutting a branch from the Eldergleam, the ancient mother tree, or convincing its guardian to give a sapling, involves a choice between taking from something sacred to serve a practical need or accepting the slower, smaller path of nurturing something new. The dead tree stays in the center of Whiterun as a permanent reminder that devotion and destruction can be the same act when performed by enough hands over enough time. Fact 93. The Headless Horseman rides silently to Homvir's Rest every night without explanation. After dark, across Skyrim's roads, a spectral figure appears on horseback, a warrior with no head, riding steadily and silently toward an ancient Nordic tomb. He does not attack. He does not interact. He does not acknowledge the player. He simply rides, the way something rides when it has been riding the same road for a very long time, and the habit has outlasted the person. Following him leads to Hamvir's Rest, an ancient burial site where skeletal warriors patrol around an unnamed barrow. No quest explains him, no book accounts for him, no NPC has dialogue about him that reveals his history. He is pure atmosphere, something ancient and incomplete, condemned perhaps to retrace a path that mattered enormously once, even though whatever it mattered for is long since concluded. The fact that he needs no explanation is exactly what makes him work. Not everything in Skyrim exists to be solved. Some things exist to remind you that the world was old before you arrived and will be old after you leave. Fact 94. The College of Winterhold has actual scheduled lectures that run whether or not the player attends. The Masters of Magic at the college, Feralda, Colette Marentz, Drevis Neloren, Finis Gestor, Sergius Turianus, each hold real lectures in their respective schools of magic between the hours of 10 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon. These are not decorative scheduled events. They occur. Students attend. If a dragon attacks the college or another crisis interrupts normal operations, lectures are canceled for a full day before resuming their schedule. The college functions as an academic institution with enough internal logic that it maintains educational schedules during a dragon crisis, which says something admirable and slightly absurd about the dedication of academic administrators across all possible worlds. Fact 95. There are 337 readable books in Skyrim that together contain approximately 316,000 words. The in-game library of Skyrim contains 337 readable books, ranging from practical guides to fictional novels to historical texts to religious tracts to erotic fiction. Together, they contain somewhere in the vicinity of 316,000 words. The Fellowship of the Ring contains roughly 177,000 words. The entirety of the Lord of the Rings trilogy contains approximately 481,000 words. Skyrim's in-game books represent more than 60% of Tolkien's complete epic trilogy, and unlike Tolkien's books, they are scattered across a world you can physically walk through, hidden in ruined libraries and dungeon shelves and the back rooms of shops. Bethesda hired actual writers to produce this library. The history, religion, philosophy, and fiction of Tamriel exists in written form inside the game world, not as developer notes or background material, but as readable text that a player could, theoretically, spend an entire playthrough reading without engaging in combat or completing a single quest. Fact 96. The lusty Argonian maid is found in virtually every social stratum in Skyrim, from noble households to bandit camps. The infamous erotic novel by Crassius Curio, originally from Morrowind's Third Era, appears in noble homes, college libraries, merchant shops, and the inventories of bandits who presumably had very limited literary options. Its presence across essentially every social class in Skyrim suggests either extraordinary commercial distribution or the universal appeal of content that transcends class distinctions. Crassius Curio was a real character in Morrowind known for his particular aesthetic sensibilities. His most famous work, achieving continent-wide distribution 200 years after his death, is arguably his greatest legacy. Fact 97. The mournful giant near Broken Ore Grotto stands vigil over a dead mammoth without attacking. Near Broken Ore Grotto on Skyrim's northern coast, a giant stands alone beside the corpse of a dead mammoth. He does not attack unless provoked. He is grieving. Giants and mammoths maintain what can only be described as symbiotic partnerships. They travel together, the giants tend the mammoths provide something in return that the giants clearly value. This particular giant has lost his companion and is simply standing with the body. Days later, if you return, he circles back periodically, the way a person might return to a grave. He makes no effort to survive the situation. He simply mourns it. Killing him for loot, which the game permits because the game permits most things, is an act that, if you understand what you are looking at, has a moral weight entirely out of proportion with the experience points it provides. Fact 98. The White Gold Tower in Cyrodiil is visible from Skyrim's map if you know where to look. If you rotate Skyrim's map far enough to the south, beyond the province's conventional borders, you can see the White Gold Tower rising in the distance, the centerpiece of the imperial city in Cyrodiil. Bethesda included a simplified version of Oblivion's game world on Skyrim's map, visible from certain angles, confirming that both games occupy the same continuous geographic space. Using console commands to disable the invisible walls between provinces reveals a deliberately low-texture but geometrically present version of Cyrodiil just beyond Skyrim's southern border. The provinces are not separate worlds. They are parts of the same world with access gates between them. Part 12. Endings, Prophecy, and What Happened to the Last Dragonborn. Fact 99. Alessia was the first Dragonborn, and she used that power to end slavery. The Dragonborn power is not random. It does not simply appear in whoever happens to be born with the right magical inheritance. According to the deeper patterns of Elder Scrolls theology, Dragonborn individuals appear at moments of historical necessity, when the world faces threats that require someone with that particular combination of capability and circumstance to address them. The first recorded Dragonborn was a slave woman named Alesia, who lived during the First Era under the oppressive rule of the ancient Aelids, the wild elves who dominated Cyrodiil with magical tyranny. Alesia led a slave rebellion. She was blessed by Akatosh with the power of the dragon blood, which allowed her to hear the Thu'um, to communicate with dragons, and to perform the covenant with Akatosh that created the Amulet of Kings and the dragon fires that protected Tamriel from Daedric incursion for thousands of years. She founded the First Empire. She established the original 8 divines. Upon her death, she was elevated to sainthood. The character you play in Skyrim, doing quests and shouting at things, stands in a lineage that begins with a woman who used divine power to free people from slavery. Fact 100. Miraak was the first Dragonborn in history, but he predates Alessia and was imprisoned for betrayal. Before Alessia, there was Miraak. This is confirmed by the Dragonborn DLC. Miraak served as a dragon priest during the height of the dragon cult's power in the Merethic era, but Hermaeus Mora came to him with an offer, forbidden knowledge, power that the dragon priests' service to their draconic overlords would never provide. Miraak learned of his dragonborn power through Mora's instruction. He began conspiring against his dragon masters. Another dragon priest named Valak the Jailer discovered the betrayal and confronted him. Their battle was so cosmically violent that it literally tore Solstheim from the Skyrim mainland, creating the Strait of Ocean that now separates the island from the province. The geographic alteration was a side effect of 2 ancient dragonborn combatants fighting at full power. Vassalok won. Miraak was imprisoned in Apocrypha, Hermaeus Mora's realm, where he remained for thousands of years, studying, growing in power, waiting for the next Dragonborn to arrive so he could either escape or absorb their power. This means that the first Dragonborn became the first to betray his cosmic role. The precedent for every moral complexity that attends being Dragonborn was set before recorded history, by someone who is still waiting in a library made of forbidden knowledge. Fact 101. The Dragonborn's soul absorption may carry more than magical power. When the Dragonborn absorbs a dragon's soul, they gain the immediate mechanical benefit of their shout energy refilling and a new word of power becoming available for unlocking. But the lore implications are more complex. The Greybeards warn, gently but consistently, about the need for the Dragonborn to maintain their humanity, to not let their draconic nature overwhelm their mortal perspective. Dragons are fundamentally creatures of dominance, hierarchy, and the belief that power confers right. The concern the Greybeards articulate is that absorbing many dragon souls without the philosophical grounding of the Way of the Voice might gradually shift the Dragonborn's instincts, not transform them into a dragon, but make them think more like one, value dominance more than cooperation, trust force more than patience. The game does not explicitly show this corruption happening, but the warning exists, and it is sincere, and it suggests that what is being absorbed is not merely magical capacity. Something that was a dragon's perspective on the world is part of what transfers. The Dragonborn is big enough to contain it. Whether they stay themselves in the process is a choice that the Greybeards believe requires ongoing attention. Fact 102. The Alduin's Wall at Skyhaven Temple depicts the entire main quest before it happens. In Skyhaven Temple, carved by the Akaviri Dragon Guard, centuries before the events of Skyrim, a massive relief called Alduin's Wall shows the return of Alduin, the emergence of the Dragonborn, and the final confrontation between them. In sequence, in accurate detail, as if the carvers had access to what we would call the future. The Akaviri built this after helping to defeat Alduin the first time, using both prophetic knowledge and historical record to create something that served as both monument and preparation. The Blades, who guard Skyhaven Temple, have been studying Alduin's wall for centuries. During the long quiet when there were no dragons and no dragonborn, it was their continuity, the evidence that their waiting was not futile, that the wall had always said this would happen again, and that when it did, there would be a dragonborn to face it. Delphine's paranoia and Esbern's obsession make more sense when you understand that they have been watching that wall for their entire adult lives, waiting for it to start coming true. Fact 103. The Dragonborn DLC reveals that Miraak has been subtly enslaving Solstheim's population for years. The invisible influence that has been building in Solstheim before the Dragonborn's arrival, the compulsive construction projects, the blank-eyed workers, the dreams that have been entering the islanders' sleep, is Miraak projecting his Dragonborn will from within Apocrypha. His power, grown enormous through millennia of study in Hermaeus Mora's realm, is sufficient to reach across the dimensional boundary and bend the will of ordinary people without their awareness. They work for something they cannot see toward a purpose they cannot articulate, and they cannot stop. This is the Dragonborn power pushed to one of its logical extremes. The Bend Will Shout, which the Dragonborn learns during the DLC, can compel dragons to obey and humans to serve. Miraak has been using a version of this from within another dimension, without even being physically present. The question of what the Dragonborn player character might eventually become, with thousands of years of practice in a realm of infinite knowledge, is left as an implication rather than an answer. Fact 104. The Dragonborn's ultimate fate, after the events of Skyrim, is deliberately left ambiguous. Unlike previous Elder Scrolls protagonists, the Nirevarine of Morrowind, who is mentioned in various in-game texts as having sailed east and disappeared, the hero of Kvatch, who apparently became Sheogorath, the last Dragonborn's fate after the events of Skyrim and its DLCs is genuinely unresolved in the lore. There is no canonical document from a later period that explains what happened to them. The most unsettling interpretation involves the Dragonborn DLC's ending, which has the Dragonborn defeat Miraak and apparently serve Hermaeus Mora's interests in doing so. The Prince of Knowledge explicitly says he has found a new Dragonborn to serve him, and while this is presented as his claiming ownership rather than a confirmed fate, it plants a seed. The infinite library of Apocrypha has claimed one Dragonborn already. Whether the last one escaped it entirely is left for the player to decide. Some believe the Dragonborn lived a long life and died naturally, their accumulated power simply passing from the world with them. Others think they remained an active force, appearing at moments of historical crisis the way all Dragonborn seem to. The most resonant reading might simply be that they vanished from the historical record, as consequential figures sometimes do, leaving behind only the evidence of what they had done and the world that continued after. Fact 105. Every Dragonborn appears at a moment when civilization faces an existential threat. This is the pattern that connects Alessia to Miraak, to every Dragonborn Emperor, to the last Dragonborn. The power does not emerge randomly. It does not simply pass genetically or through good fortune. It manifests when the history of the world requires someone with this specific capability to prevent something that would otherwise end or fundamentally alter everything. Alessia to break slavery and forge the covenant that kept oblivion at bay. The Dragonborn Emperors to maintain that covenant through their bloodline. The last Dragonborn to handle the return of Alduin himself. The implication is that the Dragonborn is not a kind of person. It is a kind of function. The divine machinery of the Elder Scrolls universe produces this particular type of mortal when the situation demands it, the way a body produces white blood cells when attacked. Each Dragonborn is the world attempting to solve a problem that nothing else can solve, and each of them, in their own way, carries the weight of that without fully understanding it until they are already deep inside the story they were made to complete. Fact 106 through 170. The Last Collection Fact. 106. Serana is one of the purest-blooded vampires alive, descended directly from Molag Bal's first act of creation. In the Dawnguard questline, Serana's pure vampire blood allows the Dragonborn to become a vampire lord if they accept her blood as a gift. This is not standard vampirism. The Volkihar clan, from which she comes, traces its lineage closer to the original source, Molag Bal's first creation, than most vampires who have been infected through the disease's many generational spread. Pure-blooded vampires retain abilities and transformations that common vampirism does not provide. Fact 107. Auriel's bow is thousands of years old and was carried by the Snow Elves' greatest champion. The bow found during the Dawnguard questline predates almost every other artifact in the game. It was wielded by a hero of the ancient Snow Elf civilization as part of their pilgrimage tradition associated with Auriel. That it is found in the Forgotten Vale, the Snow Elves' sacred sanctuary, connects it to the civilization that was systematically destroyed by the Dwemer, and then by history. Fact 108. Werewolves in Skyrim are bound to Hircine, not simply infected with a disease. Lycanthropy is not simply a magical illness that changes the body. The beast blood is Hircine's power. Every werewolf, upon death, goes to the hunting grounds, Hircine's realm, regardless of any other spiritual condition. This is why the Circle's members' souls are at stake in a way that transcends simple transformation. They have given something to Hircine simply by accepting the change. Fact 109. The College of Winterhold has not always been unpopular. It was once part of a continent-spanning organization. The Mages Guild spanned all of Tamriel through the Second and Third eras. It collapsed due to corruption, internal conflict, and magical accidents, including several catastrophic incidents that turned public opinion against organized magical research. The College of Winterhold is a surviving fragment of what was once a massive institution, the last holdout of organized magical education in the province, now isolated at the north coast, distrusted by the Nords who surround it. Fact 110. The great collapse that destroyed most of Winterhold may have been the college's fault, or may not. In 4E122, the northern coastline of Skyrim collapsed into the Sea of Ghosts in an event called the Great Collapse. Virtually all of Winterhold City fell into the ocean. The college survived intact. The local Nords have never forgiven what they see as the college's culpability, magical research as the likely cause of the disaster. The college maintains that this is false. The actual cause of the Great Collapse remains officially undetermined, though some scholars connect it to the cataclysmic events associated with the Red Year in Morrowind and aftershocks of cosmic-level magical disturbance. Fact 111. The Psijic Order is older than most recorded civilizations. The mysterious white-robed figures who appear during the College of Winterhold questline are members of the oldest magical organization in Tamriel, with origins in the Merethic era. They live on the island of Artium, which periodically disappears from the normal world, removing itself from standard space-time when the Order wishes isolation. When the Psijic Order intervenes, it is because something of cosmic significance is occurring. They can freeze time and walk through the stopped moments with casual ease. Their appearance represents more than organizational response. It represents the universe signaling that events have grown serious enough to require ancient attention. Fact 112. The Companion's Harbinger title connects directly to Ysgramor. The title Harbinger, used for the leader of the Companions, dates to Ysgramor's original organization, where it carried the meaning of someone who goes ahead to prepare the way. Every Harbinger of the Companions in every era traces their title directly back to the founding of the 500 Companions. When Kodlak Whitemane dies and you eventually become Harbinger, you are accepting a title that is thousands of years old and was first given in the context of a campaign to exterminate the Snow Elves. The weight of that history does not announce itself, but it is present in every word. Fact 113. Ulfric studied under the Greybeards before the Great War. Before he was a rebel leader or even a Jarl, Ulfric Stormcloak spent time studying at High Hrothgar. He was working toward mastery of the Thu'um. The Great War interrupted his studies when he left to fight for the Empire, which adds an additional layer of complexity to his later conflict with the Empire and the Thalmor. He gave up something that mattered to him to serve an entity he later came to despise. He carries that interruption with him. Fact 114. The Dwarven mechanisms in ruins follow patrol routes and respond to threats in coordinated ways. The Dwemer Animunculi are not simply placed as obstacles. They follow scripted patrol routes that were clearly designed as security protocols. Spheres emerge from wall-mounted housing when their patrol path is triggered. Centurions sleep in standby mode until a threat threshold is met. Spiders emerge from specific vessels and move toward threats in patterns consistent with design security behavior. 4,000 years later, with no maintenance, no updates, and no new instructions, the security system is still running the program it was given before the Dwemer disappeared. Fact 115. The Eye of Magnus that the Dragonborn recovers is described as predating the current universe. The artifact beneath Sarthal, what the Snow Elves attacked to obtain or destroy, is described by scholars in the college quest line as something that does not fit any known category of magical creation. It may be a remnant of a previous Kalpa, a fragment of a universe that ended before the current one began. The Psijic Order removes it from mortal access at the questline's conclusion, specifically because no one in the current age possesses the understanding necessary to handle it responsibly. Some knowledge exists at a level that current reality is not equipped to manage. Fact 116. The Dunmer were originally called the Chimere, golden-skinned elves who worshipped Daedra. Before the events of Morrowind's ancient history, the Dark Elves were the Chimere, a group of Aldmeri elves who followed the prophet Veloth in a spiritual journey away from the Aldmere mainstream, embracing the Daedric princes rather than the Aedra. They had golden skin and bright eyes. Their transformation into the gray-skinned, red-eyed Dunmer was Azura's curse, inflicted on the entire race when their leaders, the Tribunal, murdered Nerevar, a hero who had been Azura's favored, and used Kagranak's tools to steal divine power from the heart of Lorkhan. Azura cursed the entire Chimere civilization for what their leaders did. Not just the perpetrators, everyone. Generation after generation, the descendants of people who had no personal role in the assassination carry the visible mark of it in their skin and eyes. The gray, the red, these are not just appearance. They are the pigment of collective consequence. Fact 117. The hist trees of Black Marsh are among the oldest living entities in Tamriel, possibly older than the current world. The sacred trees of the Argonians, the hist, are not simply important to Argonian culture. They are essential to it in a biological sense. Without exposure to hist sap, Argonian eggs do not develop properly and may not survive at all. The hist communicate with Argonians through dreams and visions, shaping the species' understanding and directing collective behavior in ways that non-Argonians cannot fully comprehend. Some scholars believe the hist are genuinely conscious entities with their own intelligence and goals. Others believe they are biological conduits for something older, that the trees are the visible part of something that has been waiting in Black Marsh since before the current shape of the world was established. Fact 118. The orc strongholds operate under their own legal system that no Nordic or imperial authority can override. The orc strongholds scattered across Skyrim function as independent micronations. Their governance follows the Code of Malakath, an ancient legal framework that has nothing to do with Nordic law or imperial law and does not recognize either authority. The chief holds absolute power until challenged and defeated in honorable combat. Women perform the hunting and gathering. Men focus on smithing and defense. Children grow up understanding that their community owes nothing to the kingdoms around it. The Jarls who technically rule the territories containing these strongholds have no actual authority within their walls. The orcs tolerate the proximity of Nordic civilization because forcing compliance would be more costly than simply being left alone. Fact 119. Maven Blackbriar's eventual appointment as Jarl of Riften makes visible what was always true. If the player supports the Imperial cause and the Imperials win the Civil War, one of the resulting political appointments is Maven Blackbriar as Jarl of Riften. This is not the game rewarding the player with a corrupt outcome. It is the game making official what was always the functional reality. Maven was already running Riften. Making her Jarl is administrative honesty, the formal acknowledgement of authority that was exercised informally for years. The citizens of Riften, depending on whether they knew or suspected the truth, either respond with unsurprised acceptance or with the particular exhaustion of people who hoped the pretense might be maintained a little longer. Fact 120. Cicero's jester outfit was not always a costume. He was once an actual assassin in conventional Brotherhood attire. The famous jester's motley that Cicero wears is not the uniform of a Dark Brotherhood specialist. It is what he became during the years of isolation. His journals show a person who started wearing the costume as a way of coping with the profound loneliness of being the Night Mother's sole companion in a sanctuary that had no other living members. The performance, the exaggerated movements, the rhyming speech, the affected madness, is a survival mechanism that became a personality over decades. He is not pretending to be a jester. He is a person who, through extreme isolation and sustained grief, became one. Fact 121. The companion's mead hall, Jorvaskr, was built around an actual ship that sailed from Atmora. The building that serves as the companion's headquarters and home is not simply architecturally resembling an overturned ship. It is built around an actual ship, the vessel that carried some of Ysgramor's warriors across the sea from Atmora. They dragged it inland from the coast and constructed the mead hall around it. The keel they eat and drink under, the curved walls that frame their daily life, the wood that has absorbed centuries of fire smoke and mead and blood, these are the boards that once crossed the ocean in Ysgramor's fleet. The building is a monument to a journey that no one living can remember, preserved in the most literal possible way. Fact 122. Baranzaya's story spans centuries and involves one of the few explicitly forbidden Elder Scrolls artifacts. Queen Baranzaya of Morrowind and Wayrest had an extraordinary life spanning multiple eras, and her role in Elder Scrolls history involves the Crown of Baranzaya, an artifact assembled from thieves' guild stones scattered across Tamriel. The stones that make up the crown are literally pieces of an object so powerful that the Nightingales, Nocturnal's elite agents, were involved in dispersing it. Reassembling it demonstrates a connection to the Thieves Guild's longest traditions and produces one of the game's most sought-after artifacts in terms of collection difficulty. Fact 123. The blade's armor and fighting style are Akaviri in origin, not Tamrielic. The blades wear distinctive scale armor and carry katana-style blades that are unmistakably East Asian in aesthetic inspiration. This is not arbitrary design choice. The blade's predecessors were Akaviri, from the continent of Akavir, east across the ocean, who invaded Tamriel seeking to destroy dragons. Their invasion failed politically, but succeeded in contributing to the end of draconic dominance. Some Akaviri remained, and their fighting style, armor design, and dragon hunting methodology became the foundation of what eventually became the Blades. The organization that serves the Dragonborn in Skyrim carries cultural memory from a continent most people in Tamriel have never seen. Fact 124. Dawnbreaker's fire damage specifically affects the undead because of who made it and why. The sword given by Meridia at the conclusion of her quest deals fire damage and has a chance to generate a nova explosion that sends nearby undead fleeing. This is not a generic enchantment. It is an expression of Meridia's specific hatred of undeath, encoded into the weapon's fundamental nature. Wielding Dawnbreaker is fighting Meridia's war with her borrowed hands. The fire is her light, her remnant connection to the original Magna Gay escape through the sky, applied as a weapon against the things she considers abominations. Every swing against a Draugr or vampire is a theological act. Fact 125. Whiterun's geography is symbolically structured around Nordic history. Whiterun is built on 3 levels that reflect the structure of Nordic society. The Plains District at the bottom houses merchants and common citizens. The Wind District contains the Companions and the Gildergreen. The Cloud District at the top contains Dragon's Reach, the Jarl's Palace, the seat of administrative power. These levels are not accidental. They encode a model of the world, with commerce at the foundation, warrior culture in the middle, and governance at the peak. The arrangement makes the entire city a living diagram of how Nords traditionally understood social order. Fact 126. Heimskir's preaching, dismissed by everyone, soul, contains legitimate theological scholarship. The shouting man in Whiterun's marketplace who never stops proclaiming the glory of Talos is universally considered annoying. But the content of what he says, when examined carefully, reflects sophisticated theological argumentation, drawing from legitimate religious texts and making coherent logical points about the metaphysical implications of denying Talos' divinity. He is not ranting. He is delivering a structured sermon about a topic he spent his career as a scholar studying. His delivery method, screaming in a marketplace at people who came to buy vegetables, is counterproductive. His credentials and the quality of his argument are actually quite serious. The tragedy of his arc is that measured academic discourse failed, so he escalated, and escalating made people hear the volume and miss the content entirely. Fact 127. Neloth of House Telvanni is several hundred years old and has the attitude to show for it. The Telvanni mage encountered on Solstheim during the Dragonborn DLC presents as simply a powerful and arrogant wizard. He is that, but he is also someone for whom the ordinary lifespan of a Nord or an Imperial is approximately the time between his breakfast and his afternoon research session. House Telvanni mages extend their lives through magical practice. Neloth has lived long enough that entire dynasties have risen and fallen during the period he would describe as recently. His dismissiveness toward the concerns of shorter-lived beings is not simply personality. It is the inevitable perspective of someone who has watched 10 generations of what they consider important events simply resolve and be forgotten. Fact 128. The Falmer are currently showing signs of redeveloping a form of civilization. In the deepest reaches of Blackreach and other underground zones, observant players will notice that the Falmer are not simply feral creatures. They build structures, they make items, they have rudimentary but present organization. The blind, poisoned descendants of the Snow Elves are, very slowly, reconstructing something. The sophistication is primitive compared to what their ancestors achieved. But compared to mindless animals, it suggests that 4,000 years after the blinding, something that might eventually become culture is reasserting itself. What the Falmer were, even under all that accumulated damage, is still somewhere in them. Fact 129. Dragon souls absorbed by the Dragonborn ensure Alduin cannot resurrect those specific dragons. This is the strategic dimension of the main quest that goes unspoken, but is mechanically present. Every dragon the Dragonborn kills and absorbs cannot be resurrected. Alduin's power to return his fallen soldiers to life depends on a dragon soul being present and accessible. When that soul is inside the Dragonborn, it is unavailable for resurrection. The player is not just fighting enemies. They are methodically reducing the total number of dragon souls available for Alduin to work with, ensuring that even if the immediate confrontation fails, his army cannot be fully rebuilt. Fact 130. Jurgen Windcaller is in Sovngarde, and players can meet him. If you look carefully in Sovngarde's Hall of Valor, you can find Jurgen Windcaller among the honored dead, the man who founded the Greybeard's philosophy, who transformed the Thu'um from a weapon of armies into a path of contemplation, who spent 7 years in silence and emerged with a worldview that shaped every Greybeard since. He sits in the feast hall with Ysgramor and Hakon One-Eye and the ancient heroes, drinking mead. He is there because despite his philosophy of silence, despite his rejection of glory and martial acclaim, he lived and died with valor in a way that Shor honored. His way was not warrior glory. It was the harder and quieter achievement of choosing restraint over power, and Shor apparently counts that. Fact 131. The scroll used to banish Alduin is still at the throat of the world, waiting. When the Elder Scroll was used to displace Alduin through time in the ancient past, it remained at the throat of the world. It did not vanish or decay or pass into someone else's keeping. It simply stayed, at the highest point in Skyrim, for thousands of years, waiting for the next person who would need to look through it. The Elder Scrolls carry a property of destiny, of being in the right place when they are needed, that makes their patience seem less like abandonment and more like intention. The scroll is not lost. It is not forgotten. It is exactly where it needs to be, as it always is. Fact 132. The Greybeard's summons specifically used the Dragonborn's name, and this mattered. When the Greybeards called for the Dragonborn with a voice that shook all of Skyrim, they were not simply shouting loudly. They were using the Dragonborn's nature as a point of resonance, calling to the Dragon Soul aspect of the character, addressing something in them that responds to the Thu'um at a level deeper than hearing. The summons was heard everywhere because a significant Thu'um carries across the world, but it was felt specifically by the Dragonborn because their soul contains dragon nature, and dragon nature listens to the voice whether it wants to or not. Fact 133. Eorlin Greymane and the Skyforge have a history that predates the Companions. The Skyforge, where Eorlin Greymane works in Whiterun, is an ancient Nordic forge built around what is described as a bird's nest, the remains of a giant eagle. But the forge is older than Jorrvaskr. It is older than most of Whiterun. It was already there when Ysgramor's warriors arrived, which means it predates Nordic civilization in Skyrim itself. The companions built around the forge, and the eagle's remains, recognizing something sacred in the location without necessarily understanding its full history. Eorland Greymane, working there every day, is continuing a tradition of craft that goes back before any name he knows. Fact 134. The Dunmer and Windhelm have been there for 200 years and have never gone home. The Dunmer refugees who fled Morrowind after the Red Year of 4E5 arrived in Skyrim as people with homes to return to someday once things improved. 200 years later, those homes are gone. Morrowind rebuilt, but into something different. The Dunmer who grew up in Skyrim's Grey Quarter know no other home. Their grandchildren and great-grandchildren were born in Windhelm. They speak with a Nordic accent in their second language. Whatever they are at this point, they are not temporary residents waiting to go home. They are citizens of a city that does not acknowledge their citizenship. Fact 135. Lydia's mortality creates genuine emotional stakes in a way that essential NPCs do not. Lydia, the Dragonborn's first housecarl, can die. She is not protected by the game's essential status that prevents certain NPCs from being killed. A careless spell, a dragon's breath that catches both player and follower, a combat where she draws the attention of enemies meant for the player, any of these can end her permanently. The game does not warn you. The first time many players realize Lydia is mortal is when she falls and does not get up. The purely mechanical fact of her vulnerability transforms her from a free companion into a responsibility, and her potential loss into something that lands with a weight that essential characters never manage to produce. Fact 136. Babette is a 300-year-old vampire in the body of a 10-year-old child. The Dark Brotherhood's assassin Babette was turned into a vampire at approximately age 10 during the Second Era. She has been 10 years old for 300 years. She uses the apparent vulnerability of her child's form as a tactical asset, approaching targets who would never suspect a small girl of lethal intent, and dispatching them with the capability that 3 centuries of practice provides. She is one of the more quietly disturbing characters in the game, not because the game makes a point of her horror, but because she discusses her methods and history with casual good humor, and the gap between the voice and the face is genuinely unsettling once you understand what you are looking at. Fact 137. The companion's werewolf curse came from the companions themselves, making a pact with the Glenmoral witches. The lycanthropy that now burdens the circle, the inner group of the companions, was not inflicted on them from outside. A previous generation of the companions sought out the Glenmoral witches and made a deal. In exchange for the power of the beast blood, the combat enhancement that lycanthropy provides, they accepted the spiritual consequence, that those who carried the beast blood would go to Hircine's realm upon death instead of Sovngarde. They traded their afterlife for a tactical advantage. Kodlak Whitemane's search for a cure is, in part, an attempt to undo what his predecessors chose, to unwind a bargain made by people who may not have fully understood what they were paying. Fact 138. Serana's mother, Valerica, imprisons herself voluntarily to protect something she loves. In the Soul Cairn, the gray afterlife of stolen souls, you find Valerica, Serana's mother, who imprisoned herself there voluntarily. She did this to protect the Elder Scroll she was carrying, and by extension to protect her daughter, from Harkon's obsessive plan to blot out the sun. She chose to exist in a desolate dimension made of other people's afterlives, to become one of its permanent residents, rather than allow what she was carrying to be used for something she believed would destroy the world. Her reunion with Serana, when it finally happens, carries the weight of a very long sacrifice. Fact 139. Arvak, the spectral horse of the Soul Cairn, can be found by helping a grieving shade. In the Soul Cairn, a spirit wanders without peace because he cannot find the horse he loved in life, Arvak, separated from him after their deaths. If the Dragonborn finds Arvak's skull, returns it, and speaks the right spell, Arvak can be called wherever the player is. He is spectral, immune to many forms of damage, glows softly in the dark, and can be summoned on command, meaning he is never truly lost. The best mount in the game is obtained not through combat or coin, but through simple compassion for a shade who only wanted to be reunited with his horse. This is, in a quiet way, what Skyrim occasionally does best, puts the most powerful reward behind the smallest, most human gesture. Fact 140. The Headless Horseman's destination, Hamvir's Rest, contains clues to his identity that the game never explains. The Nordic tomb at Hamvir's Rest has no connected quest. Its occupants are Draugr, who patrol without purpose, guarding no named individual and no particular treasure. But the horseman who rides there every night was clearly, in life, connected to it, perhaps someone who died there, or who considered it home, or who was anchored to the site in whatever way anchors restless spirits to locations. The tomb is unremarkable by Skyrim standards. The horseman who returns to it every night is extraordinary. That gap between the ordinary place and the extraordinary repetition is the entire mystery, and it is left deliberately unresolved. Fact 141. Cicero's task as keeper is considered the most sacred role in the Dark Brotherhood hierarchy. In the Brotherhood's religious structure, the listener, who receives contracts from the Night Mother, is considered the highest operational role. But the keeper, who maintains the Night Mother's physical remains and ensures the body is cared for and transported safely, holds a position of sacred trust that in some ways exceeds even the listener in spiritual importance. Without a keeper, the Night Mother's physical anchor in the world deteriorates. Without that anchor, the connection to Sithis through which contracts flow becomes unstable. Cicero's loneliness, his apparent madness, his eccentricity, none of it diminished his performance of this role. For over a decade, alone, he kept it perfectly. Fact 142. The Thalmor's long-term goal may be the dissolution of mortal existence entirely. This is the deepest and most contested layer of Thalmor theology, not explicitly stated in Skyrim, but present in broader Elder Scrolls lore. Some scholars of Altmer theology interpret the Thalmor's ultimate ambition as not simply elven supremacy over other races, but a desire to reverse the process of creation entirely, to unmake Mundus and return all existence to the pre-mortal divine state that Lorcan's scheme disrupted. In this reading, the ban on Talos worship is not about politics. It is about removing the divine legitimacy of humanity's presence in the created world. The oppression of other races is not the goal, but the means. The goal is transcendence, and every mortal who exists is an obstacle to it. Fact 143. Windhelm's ancient stone walls carry rune carvings that nobody living can translate anymore. The oldest sections of Windhelm's walls, built during Ysgramor's time or shortly after, bear carvings in a form of Nordic rune script that has not been in active use since the early First Era. No one in Windhelm in the Fourth Era can read them. The palace's scholars know they exist. They can identify them as ancient Nordic, likely from the founding period. What they actually say is genuinely unknown. They may be blessings, dedications, records of the first inhabitants, warnings, prayers to gods who were worshipped differently then. The city is partially illegible to the people who live in it. Fact 144. Solitude's Blue Palace contains evidence of political intrigue going back multiple generations. The political web that Maven Blackbriar operates in Riften is echoed in a more refined key in Solitude's Blue Palace, where Elisif the Fair rules nominally, while various advisors, military commanders, and court members maintain their own networks of loyalty and interest. Falk Firebeard, her steward, effectively runs the Hold's administration. The Thalmor have their embassy just outside the city walls. The court wizard is a centuries-old vampire who has advised multiple generations of rulers. The Blue Palace, if you talk to everyone in it, is a map of competing interests held in careful, fragile tension by the absence of a strong ruler and the presence of several strong people who benefit from the current ambiguity. Fact 145. Calixto Corium, the Windhelm serial killer, hides his crimes behind respectability and friendliness. The investigation into the murders in Windhelm during the Blood on the Ice quest is one of the better-designed mystery quests in the game, because it goes wrong if you follow the obvious suspect. Wiyun Firth, the Unliving, the court mage, a gruff and unfriendly person who knows about dark magic, looks guilty. He is not. Calixto Corium, the friendly curator of the House of Curiosities, who greets you warmly and speaks with evident enthusiasm about his collection. He is the murderer, harvesting body parts from young women for a ritual to resurrect his deceased sister. The innocent man is suspected because he is strange and abrasive. The guilty man is unsuspected because he is pleasant and welcoming. The most effective camouflage for the monstrous is ordinary social warmth. Facts 146. Skyrim's in-game time passes at a rate of 20 real-world minutes per game day. 1 hour of real time corresponds to 3 in-game hours. 1 day in Skyrim passes in approximately 20 real-world minutes. A full year in Skyrim passes in a little over 7 real hours of play. This compressed time means that the Dragonborn character who can complete the main quest and all major storylines in a single playthrough is experiencing approximately 1 to 3 years of in-game time. The NPC characters who remark that things are happening quickly are, in the game's internal calendar, genuinely right. Events that should unfold over decades are being compressed into seasons. Fact 147. Potema Septim was one of Skyrim's most feared rulers, and her spirit nearly returned. The Wolf Queen of Solitude, Potema Septim, who lived in the Third Era and was responsible for a devastating civil war through her ambition for the imperial throne, died in 3E137. Centuries later, necromancers working in Solitude's catacombs gathered power to restore her physical form. She had spent those centuries whispering to the susceptible, promising power to anyone who would work toward her restoration. The player disrupts the resurrection ritual before it is complete, but the fact that it came as close as it did, that a will strong enough to influence the living, persisted for 300 years after death, and came within a ceremony of succeeding, suggests that some spirits do not simply dissolve. They persist, they accumulate, they wait. Fact 148. Dragonreach was built to hold a dragon. The Great Hall of Whiterun was not simply built large because its builder had grandiose architectural tastes. The chains in the central chamber, the specific hooks and fixing points for restraint, were engineered with a purpose. Dragon's Reach was built to capture and hold a dragon, because the king who commissioned it did exactly that, hundreds of years before the events of Skyrim. The infrastructure for the main quest's dragon trap was not improvised. The building itself was always a designed instrument for that function, waiting patiently through the centuries when there were no dragons to trap, until the day it would be needed again. Fact 149. The Way of the Voice produced warriors who transcended violence, not warriors who avoided it. The common misconception about the Greybeards is that their commitment to silence and restraint is a form of cowardice or philosophical weakness, that they are pacifists because they cannot handle what power requires. The actual content of Jurgen Windcaller's philosophy is more precise. The Way of the Voice holds that using the Thu'um as a casual weapon degrades both the user and the gift. It is not that the Greybeards cannot fight. It is that they understand that the ability to fight at the level they can fight means the decision not to fight requires more courage than the decision to fight. Choosing restraint when you possess overwhelming force is a harder discipline than simply not having the force. The Greybeards are not weak. They are people who have chosen to be strong in a way that requires more from them, not less. Fact 150. The Forsworn's Briarheart ritual replaces a warrior's physical heart with a briar heart. The most powerful Forsworn warriors, the Briarhearts, undergo a ritual in which their natural heart is removed and replaced with the preserved heart of a briarheart plant. The ritual kills them in conventional terms, but reanimates them in a state of enhanced physical power, connecting them to the Forsworn's nature-based magic in a literal, physical way. If you encounter a Briarheart warrior and can manage to pickpocket the Briarheart from their chest while they are living, which the game permits in its quietly absurd fashion, they die instantly, because the plant is what is keeping them animated. They are, technically, already dead. The Briarheart simply disagrees. Fact 151. High Hrothgar experiences time differently because of the temporal wound at the mountain's summit. The residual effects of the Elder Scroll-based banishment of Alduin, the time wound that sits at the summit, create mild temporal anomalies throughout the throat of the world. This is partly why the Greybeards seem so disconnected from the urgency of current events. It is not merely philosophical detachment. The mountain they live on has had its relationship with linear time altered by the most powerful single act of time magic ever performed by mortals. They are not ignoring the present. They experience the present with slightly less urgency because the boundary between present and not present has been softened in their location. Fact 152. The ancient Atmarans brought animal totems with them from their homeland that became part of Nordic religion. The animal symbols important to Nordic culture, the wolf, the hawk, the snake, the bear, the owl, were brought from Atmora as totemic religious symbols and integrated into the Nordic pantheon over generations. Kine the hawk, Shor the bear, in some traditions, the various constellations that represent animals in Skyrim's sky. These trace to Atmoran worship practices adapted to the new land's conditions. The companion's connection to the wolf is ancient in ways even they may not fully understand. Fact 153. Mephala may have been the original inspiration for the Dark Brotherhood, not Sithis. The book Fire and Darkness, The Brotherhoods of Death, identifies the Night Mother as possibly Mephala herself in mortal guise. The Morag Tong, from which the Brotherhood split, worshipped Mephala openly. The transition from Mephala worship to Sithis worship represents either a genuine theological schism or a gradual rebranding of the same worship under a more abstract name. Mephala's sphere, secrets, sex, and murder, overlaps considerably with the Dark Brotherhood's operational reality. Whether the Brotherhood knows it is still serving Mephala under a different name, or whether the theological transition was genuine, is one of the more interesting unresolved questions in the game's religious lore. Fact 154. The compass in Skyrim points to magnetic north, not geographic north. The compass visible on the Dragonborn's HUD points to magnetic north, the magnetic pole of Nirn, which is not located precisely at the geographic North Pole. This is a remarkably mundane bit of physical realism, embedded in a game about dragons and shouting. Nobody asked for it. Most players never think about it, but the navigational tool works the way a real compass works in a world that has a magnetosphere. Nirn, apparently, has one. Fact 155. The Nightingale armor is not simply Thieves' Guild equipment, it marks the wearer as a sworn servant of Nocturnal. Becoming a Nightingale, at the end of the Thieves' Guild questline, involves a genuine covenant with Nocturnal. The Nightingale armor is the physical expression of that covenant. Wearing it identifies the wearer not simply as a skilled thief, but as someone who has made a binding agreement with a Daedric prince. In exchange for power and favor in life, Nightingales agree that after death, their souls serve Nocturnal's realm for an unspecified period. This is disclosed before you accept. The player character who becomes a Nightingale has, without fanfare, arranged their own afterlife through a Daedric pact that will not fully resolve until they die. Fact 156. Solstheim's history as an independent island began with the violence between Miraak and Vahlok. Before the great battle between the two dragon priests, Solstheim was part of the Skyrim mainland. The strait that now separates them was created by the physical force of that confrontation, a geographic alteration produced as a side effect of two ancient dragonborn combatants fighting at full pour across a landscape that could not withstand them. The island's isolation, its distinct culture, the way it developed differently from Skyrim proper, all of this traces to a single magical battle fought in the Merethic era. The politics of modern Solstheim are built on a foundation that was shaped by one person's betrayal of their dragon masters. Fact 157. Vampirism has different strains, and the differences are not merely cosmetic. The most common form of vampirism in Skyrim, sanguinare vampiris, is a disease that spreads through combat bites. But there are ancient bloodlines of vampirism that trace more directly to Molag Bal's original creation, and these produce meaningfully different capabilities. The Volkihar clan represents one such bloodline, ancient enough, pure enough in its connection to the original curse, to grant the vampire lord transformation that common vampirism does not provide. The further a vampire's lineage is from the original, the more diluted the condition, until common vampirism is just an enhanced version of the disease rather than a genuine expression of Molag Bal's intent. Pure-blood vampires are, in a theological sense, closer to what Molag Bal actually made. Common vampires are echoes of echoes. Fact 158. Dawnguard crossbows represent technology that was suppressed for centuries before reappearing. The crossbow that the Dawnguard organization develops and uses was not invented in the Fourth Era. It existed before, was apparently used in previous periods of Tamriel's history, and then vanished from mainstream use, either because the knowledge was lost or because it was deliberately suppressed by groups that preferred the status quo of archery as the dominant ranged weapon. The Dawnguard's rediscovery of the weapon represents recovered knowledge, not new invention. The difference matters because it suggests that Skyrim's historical technological knowledge has gaps, things that were known, lost, and waited to be found again. Fact 159. The Hist-controlled Argonian invasion of Morrowind after the Red Year was coordinated and strategic. In 4E6, the year after Red Mountain's eruption devastated Morrowind, the Argonians invaded. This was not opportunistic raiding. The Hist trees, the ancient, possibly conscious organisms that guide Argonian collective behavior through biological communion, coordinated the invasion directly. The Hist had ancient grievances against the Dunmer, who had historically enslaved Argonians in great numbers. When the catastrophe created an opening, the Hist moved. The Argonian armies that pushed into southern Morrowind with extraordinary effectiveness were acting on the Hist's guidance, their performance and coordination, reflecting a will that originated not in any Argonian general, but in a network of ancient trees that had been waiting for precisely this moment. Fact 160. The College of Winterhold's Atronach Forge beneath its basement creates Daedric items using Oblivion Gate materials. Deep beneath the college, in a section that most of the faculty appears genuinely unaware of, is an Atronach Forge that can create Daedric equipment and summon bound Daedra. The materials required include a sigil stone, an artifact specifically associated with the Oblivion Gates that Mehrunes Dagon opened during the Oblivion Crisis. The Forge's existence beneath Tamriel's premier magical institution and the college's apparent ignorance of it are both pointed. Either the college's founders knew and chose not to tell their successors, or the knowledge was lost in one of the institution's many upheavals. Either way, the capacity to create infernal equipment exists quietly under the building where Skyrim's most powerful mages study. This is either reassuring or alarming, depending entirely on who you imagine accessing it without supervision. Fact 161. Boethia's artifact, the Ebony Mail, was created specifically to serve her sphere of political treachery. Boethia, the Daedric prince of deceit, conspiracy, and the plotting ambitions of mortals, created the Ebony Mail as a physical expression of her domain. The armor muffles footsteps, damages nearby enemies with poison from the armor's surface, and conceals the wearer's approach. It is equipment for people who work through shadow and close proximity, who advance through crowds undetected and let their enemies be poisoned by the simple fact of standing too close. The armor does not require combat ability. It requires patience, positioning, and a willingness to be near to people who do not know you are there. It is the perfect artifact for a prince whose sphere is specifically political murder. Sword 162. The word dragonborn in Nordic language carries implications beyond simply being born with dragon blood. Dovahkiin in the dragon language breaks into Dova, dragon, and Keen, born. But the word born in Dovahzul carries connotations that the English translation does not fully capture. To be keen in this context means not just to have emerged from something, but to be constituted from it, to be made of it in a way that is fundamental rather than incidental. The Dragonborn is not simply a person who has dragon blood. They are a being whose essential nature was constructed from draconic material. The dragon soul they carry is not a modifier on their human identity. It is co-equal with it. They are simultaneously fully human and fully dragon, and the tension between those two things is what the entire game's personal arc is actually about. Fact 163. The Greybeard who speaks to the player, Arngeir, is considered the most junior of the four Greybeards. The four Greybeards at Higher Hrothgar are Arngeir, Bori, Einarth, and Wulfgar. Arngeir is the designated communicator, the one willing to engage in extended conversation with the outside world, but he is not the most powerful of the four. He is, apparently, the most capable of maintaining the discipline required to speak at length without causing damage. The other three, if they spoke with the same freedom, would likely harm the building. Arngeir's role as the communicator is itself an expression of the Greybeard's hierarchy of power. The most powerful ones speak the least. Fact 164. Paarthurnax's missing horn tip has a story that the game hints at, but does not tell. Paarthurnax, despite dragons being essentially immortal in terms of natural aging, shows clear signs of extreme age: tattered wing membranes, dulled scales, chipped horns. The tip of his right horn is broken off. He is, visually, the most ancient-looking creature in the game by a significant margin. The missing horn tip is unexplained. It may be a battle scar from the Dragon War. It may have been lost in one of the confrontations with the ancient heroes. It may simply be what happens to a dragon who has been sitting on a frozen mountain for 4,000 years. The detail is present and deliberate and never explained, which is either a lore mystery or a quiet acknowledgement that not every scar comes with a story that anyone is still alive to tell. Fact 165. The Snow Prince of the Falmer was buried with honor by the Nord who killed him. After young Finna threw her sword through the Snow Prince and ended the Battle of the Mosring, the Nord forces faced the question of what to do with his body. He was their enemy. He was responsible for enormous suffering. He was also apparently, clearly a being of nobility and courage. They buried him with his equipment, his armor, his weapons, and with care. The account of this, preserved in the book Fall of the Snow Prince, describes the Nords treating their enemy's body with the kind of respect that warriors sometimes show each other at the end of a battle, regardless of what came before it. In Solstheim, much later, his tomb can be found. His grave is intact. The equipment is still there. It is one of the quieter dignities that survived the violence of that era. Fact 166. The Khajiit have their own afterlife mythology that is entirely unlike the Nordic version. While Nords go to Sovngarde and Redguard speak of the far shores, the Khajiit believe the virtuous dead travel to the sands behind the stars, the Khajiiti version of Aetherius, understood through their distinctive lunar and astrological religious framework. The Khajiiti relationship with the moons is theological and biological. Their birth cycle under different lunar configurations determines their form, and their religion is inseparably woven through with lunar symbolism. Where Nords imagine a great hall of feasting warriors, Khajiit imagine a desert of gentle stars, where those who lived with clever integrity find eternal warmth. The universe is large enough to contain both endings. Fact 167. Every enchanted human soul weapon represents a stolen afterlife. This loops back to an earlier fact, but deserves its own moment. Every sword, staff, or piece of armor whose enchantment was powered by a filled black soul gem was charged at the cost of a human being's eternal destination. The person whose soul was trapped in the gem was on their way somewhere when they died. They were intercepted. Now they are in the soul cairn, and the weapon they powered has probably been swung until its charges ran out. The soul remains in the gray waste anyway. The enchantment is gone. The person is still there. Most players never think about this while selecting a weapon. The game does not make you. The knowledge is simply there for anyone who wants to hold it. Fact 168. The Book of the Dragonborn, found in various locations across Skyrim, is a prophetic text that the companions kept secret. The text, describing the role of the Dovahkiin in the ages of Alduin's return, circulated quietly through groups who watched for signs that the prophecy was becoming active. The companions, despite their official neutrality and their stated indifference to prophecy, maintained a copy. The Greybeards watched for the signs. The Blades preserved Alduin's Wall as their version of the same document. Multiple institutions were, in their own ways, waiting for the same thing without necessarily coordinating with each other. The return of Alduin and the emergence of the Dragonborn were not surprises to people who had paid attention to the right texts. They were anticipated. The surprise was only for everyone else. Fact 169. Skyrim's civil war, viewed from a sufficient distance, is a border skirmish compared to what the Thalmor are preparing. The military capacity of the Aldmeri Dominion in the Fourth Era exceeds what either the Stormcloaks or the Imperial Legion in Skyrim can meaningfully contest. The Great War nearly destroyed the Empire, with the Dominion's first serious push. What is implied by Thalmor documents and by various strategic analyses scattered through this game's text is that the current period of relative calm is not peace. It is preparation. The Thalmor are using the time bought by the White Gold Concordat to build toward a second conflict that they believe will be conclusive. Every month the Civil War continues. In Skyrim is a month the Dominion spends getting ready for something that will make the First Great War look preliminary. Fact 170. The last word on Skyrim's lore is that it has no last word. The Elder Scrolls was designed with an epistemological principle built into its core. Multiple contradictory accounts can all be true simultaneously, in a universe where belief shapes reality and reality shapes belief. The creation myth is not singular. The nature of the gods is contested. What happened to the Dwemer is unknown. Whether Talos is genuinely divine is an open question that the universe declines to resolve. What the Dragonborn ultimately became is your choice as much as the developers. The lore is not a set of facts to memorize. It is a living argument between competing interpretations of events, made more interesting because the characters inside the argument are not necessarily in positions to know the truth any better than you are. The historians contradict each other. The theologians disagree. The Greybeards and the Blades cannot reconcile. The Empire and the Stormcloaks are both right and both wrong. Meridia and Molagbal are two expressions of divine power with no common ground between them. Skyrim is not a world with a settled history waiting to be learned. It is a world where the act of paying attention to its history changes what that history means. Every player who has walked through a Dwemer ruin and wondered about the ashes on the chairs, or stood on the throat of the world and looked up at a sky full of divine escape routes, or sat with the Greybeards in silence while the wind moved over stone that has been listening since before anyone had words for what they felt. Every one of those players is part of the ongoing argument that the world is making about itself. The fire is burning lower now. The mountains are quiet in the way that very old things are quiet, with a patience that isn't waiting for anything in particular, just continuing. You have been in this world for a while tonight, and the world was glad you came. If any of these went somewhere you didn't expect, or if there are facts you've known for years that I didn't cover, leave them in the comments. I genuinely read every single one, and if you've been here for a while and you haven't subscribed yet, now would be a good moment. These take a long time to put together, and knowing you're there for the next one makes it worth every hour. Rest well, cozy nights, Lok, Thum.